Among the tall trees of the thick forest, he confidently waved his sword, honing each blow to perfection. The sun's rays made their way through the branches, illuminating his focused face. Each movement was carefully worked out. Every blow was the result of endless hours of persistent training. Feeling fatigue but at the same time the pleasure of completed workout, he took a deep breath. It is time to go home to be late for breakfast. Remember that he was already 15, which meant that it was time for the age of age. The guy dressed, and the grandmother, with a sad note in her voice, said that his parents would not be able to witness this important moment in her son's life. They were famous adventurers who won the platinum rank. However, after that they disappeared mysteriously, performing their first task. He is firmly convinced that, having become an adventurer, he will be able to find his parents and return them home to finally be together. The mother, with tears in her eyes, remembered how early her husband, his beloved grandfather, went. The heart squeezed from painful memories, and the tears slowly rolled around the face. She sighed with gratitude, looking at Ralph, and mentally returned. Putting the best clothes, he strongly stated that he would inevitably reach the platinum level and make a lot of money so that his grandmother could enjoy his life. The grandmother, with warmth in her eyes, thanked Ralph for his words and said that his parents would be proud of him. She added that she believed in his talents and is sure that he will gain skills that will help you realize his dreams. Saying goodbye, Ralph kissed his grandmother in his cheek and said he had to go. Leaving the house, he headed for a huge building that stood above the village. This place was known to all residents because it was there that the ceremony of majority took place. On his way, he noticed many teenagers of his age, who were vividly discussing what skills they wanted to learn. Someone dreamed of becoming a swordmaster, reaching the top of this art, while others sought to master magic and join the group of golden lions. One of the boys noted that such skills are only the strongest, and not everyone will be able to get into this elite group. Suddenly, everyone who gathered for the ceremony was asked to pay attention to what was happening. The old man in the black mantle, with a face full of ancient wisdom, approached the altar and raised his hands. Suddenly he said that in the name of the goddess, the talents of everyone present will open. The old man invited everyone to line up in order to find out one by one what the gift awaits them. Gelt, standing among other teenagers, felt excitement and impatience. His heart was beating more often, and he thought about what was happening in front. He only heard the old man announce that one of the teenagers gained the skill of arc. The noise was growing around him, and Ralph saw other teenagers boasting his newly acquired skills. One of them stated loudly that he had mastered the score and seems to become a merchant. This expanded Ralph's outlook, showing a variety of possible skills. I thought what skill he would get. He dreamed of a sword's ability like a father, or a strong body like a mother. Suddenly, the old man announced that the turn of Ralph from Adder and invited him to approach. The boy's heart was shaking faster when he approached the magical sphere and put his hand on it. The old man in the black mantle was clearly embarrassed and acknowledged that he had never heard of such ability. The company members began to carefully study the papers in search of information about new skills. He realized that his skill was completely new. People behind began to whisper, astonished by its discovery. At this point, the old man approached Shroff and reported that the ability to heal has never been recorded in this shrine, and this was indeed a real discovery. The people around them plunged into the captured discussion of the news about the newly opened and still unknown ability. The whisper gradually grew into loud chats, emphasizing the weight of this event. Overflowing with joy and pride, Ralph rushed home. Flying into the house, he immediately began to call his grandmother. With a shining face, the guy told her about his new ability. The grandmother, who was quietly in the corner, calmly noted that she had known about it for a long time. Stunned, Ralph wondered how she learned so quickly. Grandma told Ralph that this man was constantly waiting for his return. The stranger introduced himself as Figaro, the head of the Golden Lions Guild. Hearing the name of such an influential person, Ralph was amazed. Without wasting time, Figaro suggested that he immediately move on to the essence of the case. He confidently argued that the recovery skill would show his potential if Ralph joins Golden Lviv. He assured him in his support. Despite his admiration, Ralph did not understand what his new talent was. He could not activate him, causing him to feel embarrassing. The hero reassured him, noting that Ralph had just joined adulthood, and his ability, like everything else, would manifest over time. The senior leader assured Ralph that he would take care of him, and added that his grandmother would be glad if Ralph joined them. He looked at his grandmother, and smiling, suggested that he decide himself, adding that his parents would also be glad to do this. Everyone felt that many trials and adventures were waiting for him, but he was ready for them. Having thought for a moment, he nodded strongly and bowed to Figaro, begging to take care of him. Figaro smiled warmly, shaking his hand firmly, assuring his promise. He added that he believes in Ralpho's abilities, and that together they will be able to achieve great achievements. A few months later, Ralph was engaged in the transfer of heavy boxes, helping members of the guild. One of the men, also a participant in the guild, annoyed that Ralph is not suitable. Hearing this, Ralph immediately took the boxes and apologized to the job. Watching his efforts, they thought about how many more Mr. Figaro would keep Ralph nearby. At that moment, a girl named Arya turned to him, named him, and reported that the boss was calling Ralph to her office. Ralph entered the Figaro's office, where he was suddenly stunned by the news. The leader decided to exclude him from the rows of golden lions. This message was a real shock for Ralph. The hero said that for months he was waiting for the results from his recovery skills, but she never activated. In fact, Ralph has tried many ways, but he failed to activate his skill. In the end, he began his usual affairs, cherishing hope that he could come in handy. He also explained that, as Ralph knows, Guild already has a Gata with a sword and Arya with a magical vessel. None-less people like Ralph, there is no place in their guild. He added that he could no longer cover him, as other members of the guild insisted on him. Quickly guessing what to wait, he suggested that his skill may be activated in a certain situation. The hero stretched out the Ralph document and explained that since he failed to activate his skill, the document specifies the amount of compensation, which he must pay the guild for failure to fulfill the conditions. Ralph cast his gaze on the piece of paper and began to read. He personally realized that compensation was 5 million gardens. He loudly stated that he was not able to earn that amount, but Figaro suggested to sell him a house and promised to close his eyes on the rest of the debt. Ralph was stunned by heard. He reported that his grandmother lives in the house, so he would like to avoid his sale at any price. Ralph explained that his parents may return, and if there is no home, he may never see them again. If pleaded with Figaro to give him a little time, assuring that he would find a way to make money and repay the debt. Figaro, smiling, agreed to leave his house. Figaro suggested that Ralph join another adventurers' guild to make money, although he doubted that someone would agree to accept it, hinting that the direct path for Ralph was to become a garbage collector. Figaro strongly advised. A year after the Golden Lions Guild, Ralph was on the streets, earning a living as a garbage collector. It was a dirty and thankless work, but he did not have another choice. One day, walking through the streets of the city, he noticed a small pebble on the ground. Lifting it, he found it a magical crystal, which was barely noticeably shimmering in his hand. This find became the only property of this day. The earnings were so scanty that he barely glued the ends meet, not to mention the payment of interest for debt. Only ashes remained from things. He looked at the crystal in his hand and involuntarily compared himself with this stone. Like him, this crystal once had a majestic power, but now it is forgotten and no one needs. He was expelled from the Golden Lions a year ago, and since then his healing skills have not manifested. Residents of the city began to call him worthless. One of the Adventurers' Guilds still accepted it, but forced the cheapest and most difficult tasks, such as collecting garbage from the streets. He made every effort to stay afloat, but fate was merciless. Their house was sold and they were on the street. For 6 months he lost his only person. His grandmother died of illness. This tragedy struck him deeply, leaving in despair. He not only could not become an adventurer, but also failed the promise given to his grandmother. Now he stood in front of a huge pit designed for garbage. He reflected his worthlessness and why he received such a vain ability, and his thoughts fully captured him. It seemed that life turned into an endless number of disappointments and failures. Looking at the pebble on his palm, he heard the cry of his palm that punched his silence. Dumping out of captivity of gloomy thoughts, Ralph turned rapidly and realized that the sound came from the thickets of the forest. On a small lawn, the girl desperately ordered the goblins to stay away, but they did not pay attention to her request. Crazy. She stood firmly, ready for battle. The face radiated determination and confidence, despite the numerical advantage of the enemy. Suddenly, obeying the internal gust, Ralph jumped out of the bushes and stood in front of her, protecting from the approach of the monster. The heart was crazy, but he tried to keep calm. He stood side by side, opposing the goblins. Ralph glanced at the girl from the edge of the eye, asking if everything was fine. She nodded in response. Her eyes were grateful and determined. He thought feverishly the following steps, because he had never met with goblins before. Fear paralyzed him, preventing moving freely. Looking at, he saw 3 goblins, each of which looked threatening. I am sure that everything would be fine. He remembered how his father had a sword. The fencing master, his father trained him every day, and Ralph, following the instructions, honed his skills, hoping to reach the same heights. Inhaling deeper, he tightly squeezed the sword's hand, taking a fighting position and trying to hide his excitement. The goblins, growling and showing their fangs, rushed directly to Ralph, and he barely had time to lift the sword for protection. Suddenly, he saw his sword cracked, and a sharp fragment of steel flew rapidly directly into the girl. It happened immediately. The girl, not blinking or frightened, raised her hand confidently, looking directly at the wreck that was rapidly approaching her. In the next moment, the fragments seemed to explode into small particles, scattering to the ground. Tired of it, I did not understand what happened and how the girl was able to do so. He was already ready to ask her a question when he suddenly heard her cry, warning about the danger. He noticed goblin around him, that with his sword he attacked him from the shadow. Ralph managed to evade the last moment and, using inertia, hit goblin in his back. The creature fell to the ground, defeated. 2 other goblins, seeing the death of a comrade, froze for a moment. Panic, goblins rushed to the depths of the forest, leaving Ralph and the girl themselves among the desert lawn. He took a breath and looked at the girl, noticing that she had suffered. Her hand was scratched and bleed. Ralph came closer, trying to ask the girl whether she was fine with her, but she retreated, asking him not to touch her. He immediately apologized, explaining that he noticed her wound and sincerely wanted to help. The girl shook her head and told that she had the skill of destruction, so touching her hand can lead to fatal consequences. Looking at her with surprise, he tried to understand what he heard. He has never met such ability. Gradually, he became clear why his sword flew into pieces when she raised her hand. The girl, sadly looking down, nodded. Her hand devastates everything she touches, regardless of her desire. She was stunned, watching such an incredible and destructive force. Carol lifted her eyes on him and thanked for the salvation. She introduced herself as Elsa. Ralph, smiling, reciprocated, calling his name. She apologized for her sharpness and explained that she had not yet learned to fully control her abilities. She added that she did not want to harm her rescuer, and her only support in the curb of abilities is the glove she holds. Ralph tried to reassure her, noting that her skill had protected her from a fragment of a sword. For the first time in a long time, Elsa smiled at him with warmth and gratitude for his understanding. He slowly approached the girl, not believing that everything was finally over. Thoughts were circling in his head. After a long hesitation, he finally asked her that she did in such a dangerous place and how it happened that the goblins attacked her. He managed to start a conversation, but suddenly Ralph noticed a collar on her neck, which he had not seen before. His eyes expanded with surprise, but nothing had time to say, because the forest came from the forest. The hilly and angry goblins suddenly jumped out of the thickets. Ralph immediately warned. Another goblin returned. He instinctively lifted his sword, but remembered that he was broken, and with the sword in front, he rushed directly at Elsa. Ralph, without delaying, rushed forward to protect the girl. He grabbed her and tried to shy away from. Frightened, she exclaimed, realizing that he had touched her hand. She warned him that it would lead to his death. Ralph realized that he may have really disappeared. His life was short, and probably he would die, leaving no trace. In his heart, a warm thought was born. If he can benefit someone, then it will not be so bad. He ordered Elga to flee, ready to accept his fate. Suddenly, a strange voice was heard in his head, and before his eyes there was an inscription that testified to the fulfillment of the condition to activate the skill. His eyes expanded with surprise. He has not yet realized the meaning of this. She, who realized the essence of her destructive ability, thought that with the arrival of Ralph, her strength could become some new embodiment. The system asks whether it wants to activate the recovery skill. Her voice replied confidently, yes. The system then reported that the iron sword broke. Ralph read it with surprise. The system wondered whether he wanted to restore the legendary iron sword. After a short pause, he agreed, and the sword began to materialize in his hands. Goblin was quite close, and Ralph sharply threw forward his recently found sword. The sword easily divided Goblin in half, and he fell away on the ground. He stood over his body, still trying to realize what had happened. She looked at Ralph, widely revealing her eyes from surprise and misunderstanding. She could not believe that he touched her hands and remained unharmed her destructive force. Ralph, still holding his hand, tried to understand what was happening. He looked at his sword with delight and surprise, which resumed in a great way. On this day, the ability he considered was in vain was first manifested, and this happened at an extremely important moment. He also met the girl with the skill of destruction. For the first time he felt the real power and meaning of his gift. Without his gaze from Ralph, Elsa suddenly asked if he was intended for her. Her question was caught by Ralph by surprise, and he looked at Elsa in surprise. He tried to realize its meaning and why it was so affected. In her eyes he saw a mixture of fear, hope, and despair that was understood to him as anyone else. Ralph, still looking at his sword, could not believe in the incredible transformation he had experienced. Now the weapon shone as if she had become new. Elsa, without his eyes from Ralph, realized that touching his hand did not harm him. She began to think that he was her elect, the one who could free her from the curse. With sadness on her face and heavy heart, she told Ralph about her life in the village. She was considered a curse since childhood, the ability to destroy everything she touched on, turning her into a hermit. He listened carefully, not looking at, trying to grasp the seriousness of her situation. He said that her mother died immediately after her birth, becoming the first victim of her destructive touch. Despite the boundless love for her daughter, one day his father lost her hand because of her abilities. Subsequently, life was cut short because Elsa remained lonely in the world that feared her and her invincible power. The villagers perceive it as a natural disaster, and even Elsa herself could not blame them. One day, unexpectedly, an unusual priest appeared in the village. He arrived with a special mission: to find gloves for his father who can curb her forces. In addition, it was predicted that one day there will be a man who would free her from the curse and become her defender. He will be able to assure everyone of her kindness and touch her without fear of being destroyed. The young man, surprised by her story, could barely believe and heard. He did not imagine that her story would be so tragic. Asked if he was the same man he spoke of, he did not receive the answer. Surprised by the events, he still couldn't believe what was happening. He turned to Elsa, asking why she was lonely wandering the forest. Elsa, having lowered her gaze, explained that she was sent here as a slave. Last year, the harvest was unsuccessful, and the peasants, not knowing how to survive, decided to sell it, a girl with a curse, to slavery, to the house of Walsens in Agar in exchange for food. He still comprehends her story. Again, remember the moment when the system suddenly appeared in front of him. He remembered how the system suggested to restore his broken iron sword and turned it into a legendary weapon. At that moment, he realized that he seemed to be a vain ability to recover for the first time. His thoughts were circling, intertwining in consciousness, and gradually he became aware of how all the events led him to this meeting with Elsa. Elsa, giving him a warm smile, commented what they met. The confidence and hope that radiated her eyes when she said she considers him chosen, etched in Ralph's thoughts. He looked at her, feeling the strange combination of surprise and consent. It seemed to him that he may have really brought them together. Sighing, he confessed that for the first time in his life his ability showed himself. Sitting on large stones in the midst of the forest, when the trees whispered softly around each other, what just happened did not come out of their heads. Elsa realized the weight of this moment, and felt that fate finally gave them the opportunity. The elves said that his talent remained hidden, and life was complicated by excessive debt. Because of this, he found himself in the forest where he heard her cries for help. Elsa, a little surprised, guessed that he was also lonely in that forest, and that led them to this meeting. Suddenly, her gaze cleared, and she suggested Ralph again to try to use the recovery skill. She pointed to a short sword lying on the ground and suggested that he test the skill on it. Meanwhile, a large orca approached them, accompanied by a flock of goblin. It is sick, but still agreeing. He reached out to the sword, focused, and tried to activate his skill. But nothing happened, and he could not understand why his power was not acting. To cheer him up, she suggested trying again, reminding how well it turned out last time. Suddenly Ralph, turning to her, asked Elsa to destroy a short sword with the help of his destructive skills. To the surprised request of Elsa, hesitantly agreed. At one moment she touched the sword, and he crumbled on small debris. The crumbs of weapons fell on the ground, leaving everyone in a stunned silence. Both looked at the sword's wreckage with surprise and confusion. Seeing Ralph's embarrassment, Elsa tried to cheer him up. She assured that they should not be upset, because their journey just started. returned to Elsa sharply and without hesitation, grabbing her hand. At that moment, a system message appeared before his eyes. A broken short sword was found, and its restoration was offered. Returning to the moment they held hands, and Elsa destroyed something, Ralph unexpectedly realized that their joint actions could be the key to activating his ability. I decided to check his guess. Perhaps things destroyed by its skills can be restored when they interact with each other. She looked at him distrustful without taking this option. For the first time I heard about similar skills. The screen in front of Rolf shows the various qualities of the swords that he could reproduce, from ordinary to legendary. There were interest on the interests, probably indicating the chances of success. Rolf chose the usual quality with 90% probability, deciding to start with a simpler task. In a moment, they already held a new short sword in their hands. Rolf was delighted, because his assumption was true. He could see the sword characteristics that confirmed his successful recovery. I realized why his skills did not work before. If his theory is correct, then his ability does not work without Elsa's participation. Squeeze this hand firmly and joyfully exclaim that their skills are amazingly complementary to each other. Their united power gave her the belief that they could become one. But suddenly their reflections were interrupted by barely audible steps that came from the trees. Seeing them, she cried away from fear, and an angry orc, turning to Ralph, said that he killed his friends, and now he would pay for it. Ralph told that this orc named the kitchen, attacked their van. Trying to protect her carefully, he loudly urged Elsa to retreat, but she was determined and insisted on fighting with him. Annoyed with their dispute, ordered to stop the altercation immediately. Without a second he rushed to the goblins, armed with an incredibly sharp and light sword. With each stamped blade, he felt how easily splits the flesh and bone, as if he had cut air. One by one, the goblins fell to his feet, not having time to realize what was happening at all. Blood splashed on all sides, but Ralph moved further, fully immersed in the battle. He looked at the sword and could not believe his eyes. The blade glowed with an inner glow, as if saturated with unknown magical energy. His sharpness and lightness were amazed. He never felt anything like this. The sword managed his hand, directing the evil with the eyes that burned hatred, and the muscles were pierced under the skin, like steel ropes. Because of this, the cold ran on the back of Raoul, but fear instantly changed determination. The retreat was impossible. The orc waved with his. She rushed to Ralph, barely holding back tears of joy from relief that he was intact. She said how afraid of his life, and what great joy she felt from his victory in this terrible battle. The exhausted Ralph, relying on his sword, showed a fallen alley. He was convinced that he ordered Goblin to attack her trolley. Turning to Elsa, focused his gaze on the fallen alley and the bodies scattered around the goblins. A worried look covered his face. He wondered what her further plans were, and suggested joining him in his journeys. Elsa, sighing, raised her hand and pointed to the collar that stuck her neck. She explained that he has a powerful magic of detection, and any attempt to remove it will lead to an explosion that will instantly kill her. She also added that she would remain a slave of Waltzinch until there is a magical artifact. But she just met her chosen one, in which she hoped to find salvation. Hearing this, Ralph shook his head unexpectedly. In his eyes they burned rage and determination. She told her that the sword was costing 3 million gardens, and suggested using it to release it. He said it was a gift from his father and their first common work. Raoul realized her feelings, but here in his head, a new idea flashed. Elsa was silent and thoughtfully looked at the distance, not answering for a long time. And Ralph, realizing the seriousness of their situation, begged her for help. His words were sincere and desperate, because he knew that without her, his abilities were in vain. Finally, Elsa agreed, and offered to start work immediately. Again, taking the weapon scattered, each time carefully connecting the parts, focusing on its restoration. After a few hours of hard work, they dug to the ground, admiring the results of work. The restored blades, maces, and shields were shining with novelty. But Rolf sighed heavily, because many of the recovered objects were not found to be any legendary. Feeling fatigue and frustration, he doubted the success of their journey. Suddenly, Elsa noticed a small crystal left by goblins on Earth. She proposed to destroy it with her skills. At this point, the system sent a message about the detection of the destroyed crystal by offering its recovery. Suddenly, Ralph felt a powerful magical energy seized his body. He realized that he gained experience for his skill, and shared it with Elsa. Elsa, stunned, admitted that she had never heard of increasing the level of skills. Studying data in the system, he found that his regeneration skill was already at the second level, and the chance of success increased by 1%. He realized that increasing the level of skills through the destruction of monsters, new prospects are opened. Each achievement improved the efficiency of regeneration, which enhanced teamwork. They turned the land around them and gathered weapons, trying to estimate their value. All their work reached about 10,000 guards, which, as he understood, was not enough for their purposes. Elsa, noticing his disappointment, tried to reassure him, saying that everything was fine and that they would find another way. The soul, boiling with indignation and determination, exclaimed that she turned into a slave, although she did nothing wrong. It was unfairly unfair, and he was not going to retreat until he released her. He was moved by his determination and sincere care. She lowered her gaze and quietly thanked for the support and desire to fight for her freedom. Suddenly, Ralph had a new thought. He remembered that healing herbs that could accelerate wound healing were growing nearby. He got up, he thwarted one of them, and suggested Elga to attach to her wounds. Although Elsa argued that her wound is a trifle and should not worry, Ralph, realizing that she could lead to a serious infection, insisted on applying the healing grass personally. Carefully approaching, he gently put the healing grass on her wound. Elsa, feeling warm and care, thanked him. At that moment, a flash appeared in her eyes, and she asked if Ralph could restore not only weapons, but also herbs. Ralph was surprised because he did not even think about it, but felt rational grain in her words. Elsa explained that if you restore herbs, even the most severe wounds can be healed, and legendary herbs can make significant profits. I realized that this could really become a lifelong straw and suggested that he try it immediately. They began to focus on collecting all the possible herbs that just found. Quietly and unnoticed, they collected a whole bunch of fresh, shiny leaves, which was then carefully laid out in front of them. Valve raised one of the leaves, admiring its wonderful properties. These herbs had the legendary quality and ability to recover at a rate of 300. They are able to instantly heal serious wounds and burns. Ralph saved this fascinating grass in 500,000 gardens that struck Elsa lively. She couldn't believe her ears. Grasping the Elsa enthusiastically, he realized that the grass collected had extraordinary value. The sheets attached to the weapons led him to capture. Their joint work was evaluated in the spectacular 6.5 million guard. Ralph's eyes shone with joy when he realized that they had obtained such a large sum. She was amazed by their success. The cost of grasses and restored weapons opened up new horizons of opportunities. Affered by success, Alf wondered if this amount was enough to release Elsa. She looked at Ralph with doubt, wondering whether it was worth spending everything on her freedom, because all these items were created by him. He replied with adamant confidence that it was their joint achievement, the result of joint efforts. He was deeply moved by him. She rose and gathered thoughts. She asked him for one service. Elsa told Ralph that her clothes had turned into helpless rags. Her face combined surprise and anxiety. She asked to restore her appearance. Ralph only nodded, without words understanding her need. Subsequently, the system already proposed to restore her clothes, and Ralph made this decision without hesitation. But before he managed to do something, Elsa approached him from behind. Her embrace filled Ralph with such a sincere gratitude that his heart was overwhelmed with excitement and pride. She expressed her joy without shame. In her voice there was a wonderful mixture of gratitude and surprise. Elsa confessed that she shared with Ralph her desire to just touch someone. Elsa asked Ralph to give her the opportunity to feel this moment, to enjoy this unique opportunity. Ralph agreed silently, feeling the warmth and thanks of Elsa fill his heart. They stood together, in her arms, imbued with tenderness and gratitude that touched the depths of his soul. It seemed that at that moment she stopped, allowing them to enjoy. However, Ralph and Elsa remained stationary, merging with the surrounding nature, as if they became part of this perfect moment in harmony with life around. However, their carelessness was torn apart by the sudden appearance of the old man, who ran to them, waving his hands and begging for help. His face was terrified of horror, and he chose, trying to convey his message. The man shouted that the goblins and orcs attacked the visa. His voice trembled with fear. Running closer, he began to bow, clearly in a panic. Suddenly he recognized the man. It was a tax inspector from the Valsench family, Almani-san. Suddenly his eyes flooded when he recognized Els and noticed that she was intact. He could not believe his eyes when he saw her free, Amani began to mutter something as possible. But Elsa interrupted him, pointing to Ralph and explaining that it was he who defeated the orca, so Amani could be calm. The inspector threw a skeptical look at Ralph. His eyes spoke in doubt and distrust. Elsa got rig orca and handed it to Almani, adding that Ralph not only overcame the monster, but also saved it. Almani, carefully examining the horn, could not believe his ears. He rotated the horn in his hands, surprised how such a young guy was able to cope with the orc. However, considering a decisive Ralph's facial expression, he realized that the young man was really able to defeat the orca. Gathering with his thoughts, he asked Ralph. When considering the proposal of the diamant, who strongly asked for help, the tax collector explained that he needed the help of Ralph in order to get the money from the cart. They said that their visor was accompanied by the escort of the young owner of the Golden Lions, but when the monster appeared, they left everything and fled. After listening carefully to the inspector, he thought for a moment he heard. After a short thought, he agreed to take up the task, but set one condition. Diamant, without hiding excitement, was looking forward to hearing this condition. He clearly stated that in exchange for his help, he wishes freedom for Elsa. Bonnie was amazed at that requirement, and asked whether Ralph intended to buy it. He replied that he did not intend to buy it, but only seeks to be free from all obligations and could live her life. The inspector thoughtfully scared, thinking about Ralph. He recalled that the debt of the village of Elsa was tremendous 3 million gardera, and asked if Ralph was able to pay that amount. He confessed that he had no such amount, but suggested an alternative. He demonstrated 6 leaves of rare herbs from Aman, noting that each of them costs 500,000 garders. The inspector took one of the leaflets, smiling at the boldness of such a statement. However, after careful consideration of the grass, its facial expression has changed. Realizing that even the price of 500,000 guards for each letter was too low for such a rareness, Almani estimated the value of this proposal and agreed on Ralph. He promised that Elsa would be free as soon as they returned the money from the van. At the same time, they looked at each other, and their eyes glowed with joy and relief. Together with Almani, they headed to the place where they left the van. The road was not easy, but the determination of Ralph and Elsa remained unbreakable. Raoul approached a van, crowded with chests and boxes filled with various jewelry and money. After completing things, Almani approached Elsa. Stopping in front of her, he looked at her eyes and removed her collar with tenderness. Elsa was stunned and did not immediately realize what had happened. When the awareness of freedom broke out in it, she exclaimed, splashing all the accumulated emotions. Watching this touching scene, Almani could not restrain his smile. He remembered his youth when the feelings were just as strong and sincere. His heart was filled with warmth, and he felt that he had helped not only to recover money, but also to change someone's life for the better. He approached Ralph and apologized for having doubted his abilities before, suggested that he go to the city together. The trolley finally rolled into the walls of the city, and Ralph and Elsa looked at the high stone walls that inspired a sense of security and stability. They symbolized the line between the wild and dangerous world. Ralph sincerely thanked Almani for everything, especially for the help and liberation of Elsa. Manny thanked Ralph for his help, noting that the agreement was extremely profitable. He stressed that the sale of rare herbs would bring considerable profit. When they got the town, Diamond again turned to Ralph, reminding the promised reward for the task. Suddenly, he thought, and he apologized, explaining that he should leave the cart at the intersection. Noticing Ralph behind the counter, the girl smiled warmly. She thought he had brought some trophies, so she asked if they could see them. We all felt relieved instead of confusion. Carefully put the bag on the table. The girl took orcorn into her hands. Her eyes were surprised. Everyone was stunning around. They frozen for a moment, and then their whispers filled the room, multiplying distrust. Subsequently, the hall exploded with loud laughter and sarcastic remarks. Not everyone believed that Ralph really brought an orca. Some even joked that it had an orca, causing a new wave of laughter. Elsa, having heard the ridicule, did not withstand and said loud that Ralph had won both goblin and orca. The words sounded with such confidence and anger that for a moment everyone fell silent. However, later, laughing again, they began to assure that it was an absurdity and no one believes her. They could not imagine that a simple garbage can overcome such dangerous creatures. Looking at Elsa with tenderness and gratitude, he realized her desire to protect him. However, Rolf realized that their words would not affect the opinions of others. Thanks for his support, he quietly asked her to avoid such disputes. Elsa was confused, not understanding why people do not trust Rolf. After all, she saw him in action, admiring his incredible skill and strength. At this point, the girl suddenly stated that all the things brought by Rolf were real. Grace shone with a smile when she stated that it was a striking job. She added that she estimated the crystals in the corner of orcs at a total amount of 250,000 guards. All around who laughed before, realizing their mistake, began to retreat. Figaro suddenly appeared next to them, and his appearance increased the tension in the air. Ralph Relacha, noticing his personal presence with an ironic smile, threw a sarcastic track that God had sent him a little things. Figaro reminded him of the debt to the dead. From his tone, Ralph was only more annoyed. Near Figaro stood a convoy, looking closely at Ralph with distrust and suspicion. Some of them asked if he was going to deceive them by selling them their materials. Ralph was surprised, and could not understand what it was about. He looked at Elsa and advised her not to lie, adding that the members of the Golden Lions would never escape if they saw a regular orc. Ralph firmly stated that Elsa was telling the truth that caused indignant whispers among the accompanying ones. One of them, without standing anger, spoke forward, and asked if Ralph wanted to try their patience again and question their honor. Suddenly, a confident voice sounded in the hall. Almans, apologizing for the delay, went closer, and, noticing the audience, swirled his eyes with a weak surprise. Figaro, clearly annoyed, returned to him and asked what brought him here. Turning to Figaro, Monet noted that he intends to reward Ralph for his achievement. Hearing the words Amani, their voice was filled with embarrassment, because they realized that their lies were exposed. They began to turn away, not knowing how to respond to this situation. Having realized the seriousness of the situation, he slowly lowered his head, and his companions were awkwardly tried to justify himself, muttering excuses. Looking at Figaro, he remembered how he confessed to leave this meaningless guild and take his father's place. Breakdown in anger in order to silence, he announced his decision to go and let go of the attendants. And they stood, staring at each other, while our hero was sad in his eyes. It is no longer possible to change Figaro. Elsa, seeing that everything was settling, smiled satisfied, feeling deep. In a moment, they came out, leaving behind the Homer and the tense views of the members of the guild. In the air, a warm evening aroma wandered. A light breeze gently moved Elsa's hair. Diamond, with a barely tired voice, stopped and returned to Ralph, apologized for all the troubles that caused the subordinate to the young master. He stretched out a bag of money, noting that it was his well-deserved award. The money line approached closer so that no one heard his words, and whispers added that he has another small personal gift. Ralph took the bag, feeling its weight and bell coins inside. He nodded in gratitude, because he could not find words to express a storm of emotions that raged inside. For a while they walked a wide corridor, illuminated by a soft flame of torches. The stone walls echoed their steps, creating a sense of comfort and rest. They reached the spacious and light hall with luxurious furniture and a huge bed in the center. It was a real shelter that Aman gave them, where you can forget all the difficulties and problems. With light in her eyes, she immediately rushed to the bed, feeling his softness and the space wrapped her tired body. She closed her eyes, enjoying this moment, and then returning to Ralph, inviting him to join. The gaze glowed with genuine gratitude and tenderness. He remembered how Elsa suggested him next to her. It is embarrassed, but moved by her words, he slowly approached the bed and sat down. Soft pillows and blankets covered it, giving a feeling of warmth and rest. Alf slowly opened his eyes when the morning sun penetrated through the curtains, filling the room with a gentle glow. She lay quietly, with a slight expression on her face. Her hair was gently scattered on the pillow. Leaving a warm bed, he reached and began to reproduce the events last night. At first he hesitated, not sure whether he was ready for such proximity, but eventually succumbed to her gentle voice and lay side by side. Half a night, he lay with his eyes open, listening to her breathing. He could not understand how it was possible to sleep in a situation where his thoughts flew into the whirlwind, and his heart was beating quickly. Does not fill the whole room. The girl slept carelessly, as if all the anxieties of the world bypassed her side. Rising to the elbow in the dark, Ralph looked at Elsa. She seemed calm, and this look reminded him of a busy and rich day. Thoughts on how they overcame all the difficulties, and how she trusted him, reassured him. He also fell asleep soon, remembering this moment. The wedding came quietly and peacefully. Rolf rose out of bed, went to the window, and looked at the city that was awake. For a long time he had not had such a quiet morning, free from worries and excitement. This time, Elsa woke up from the sounds of his steps and wished a good morning. Her voice was gentle and warm. It sounded special charm. They strolled through the city slowly, enjoying its fussy rhythm. Elsa looked at Ralph and asked him plans today. He replied that first of all he should go to the guild to ventilate a little. Suddenly she said with incredible passion that she also wanted to become an adventurer like him. Ralph was amazed at her determination. When they entered the guild, they were met by the girl for a rack. She helped Elga register and soon handed her a card, a simple but symbolic sign of new beginnings and opportunities. The girl explained that Elsa now officially became a member of the guild and began to talk about the system of ranks, starting from the lowest level, Iron. The world explained that travelers perform various tasks throughout the country, for which they receive awards. By collecting significant achievements and experiences, they increase their rank, which opens access to more complex and more paid missions. The highest level is Platinum rank, accessible only to the most capable adventurers. Elsa looked at Ralph, holding her card. She saw admiration and determination in his eyes. Recalling that Ralph's parents had reached Platinum rank, she asked with genuine interest in what rank he reached. Ralph, a little discorded, confessed that he had only an Iron rank. Elsa, without losing passion, said that now that they would make every effort to get a Platinum. Her confidence and enthusiasm were really contagious. He felt a warm wave of support and admiration by turning to Elsa. Her sincere desire for adventures was so moving and pure that he could not notice it. Ralph stopped before the bulletin board, carefully examining the tasks. The guard hall was overflowing with noise and fuss. The adventurers of all levels discussed their plans, preparing for new achievements. Advertising contained the task for every taste, from the accompaniment of high-ranking officials to the study of mysterious dungeons. But Ralph, standing next to Elsa, noted that such tasks are only available for senior adventurers. Elsa suggested trying something of this, but Raoul reminded you should first go to the ammunition and check its armor. He also added that the weapon they made yesterday should be sold. She ran deep into the store immediately to pick up a more appropriate outfit. Ralph sighed with relief. Elsa soon stood next to Ralph, holding an elegant bow firmly in her hands. Her eyes shone with delight when she stated she wanted to take it. After all, in her home village, she often hunted and had good shooting skills. Thoroughly inspecting the chosen bow, he nodded and went to the rack with armor. There, his attention was attracted by a new shield and a bib. Taking them in his hands, he felt their heaviness and strength. Holding the armor in front of him, Ralph stated that he intended to buy them. He noted that used equipment is sold here at very attractive prices, which struck it. At this point, a weapon approached them. A strong physique man with a thick beard and good eyes. He handed them a bag of money that has been raised from the sale of their weapons. The gunman sincerely thanked them for the agreement, assuring that their new equipment was of excellent quality. The conversation with the gunfire gradually switched to the latest news. He reported that red-eyed Bernard, a legendary merchant and adventurer who was going on incredible rumors, would soon arrive at the Adgrap. The gunman added that this guest may be interested in any valuable finds. The Emperor enthusiastically said that Bernard is an outstanding adventure seeker, and meeting with him can be extremely significant. According to the weapon, Bernard is constantly traveling the world, engaging in the collection, purchase and sale of the most expensive and rare artifacts. She was stunned by Herd and could not hide her surprise. Suddenly, the armor noted that Ralph was still holding old equipment. He suggested making sure his serviceability, otherwise the risk of life was too high. He looked at Elsa and could not hold back smiles. He noted that the new bib won her perfectly, but still asked if he did not tight. With a slight smile, I assured him that everything was fine, and this bib was sitting perfectly on it. After that, he suggested not to spend time and immediately do things. Rolf, aware of the importance of their mission, suggested that he collect medicinal herbs. Suddenly the system told him of unblocking a new active skill, material synthesis. This discovery was genuinely surprised by him, and he immediately shared the news with Elsa. He rushed to the nearest grass and trampled it. This time, he immediately reported Ralph that he found medicinal and poisonous herbs that could be combined. Synthesizing them, he received a healing pill. Inspired by success, Ralph proposed additional experiments. By connecting different objects, they obtained impressive results. Combining the grass with the grass, they created a strong rope. The tree and a strong rope turned into a mace, and by adding goblin's bone, they got a goblin mace. Ralph rejoiced in new opportunities, until strange sounds with the yam broken by Elsa had broken their idol. Without delay, he waved his sword and cut the skeleton in half. The bones were scattered on the ground, but it immediately covered thoughts about the mysterious appearance of this skeleton here. While he was thinking, Elsa paid his attention to the pit in the ground. The soil, which just restored, collapsed, opening the passage to the dungeon. Carefully stepping forward, Ralph was amazed that the dungeon could be so close to the city. The dark corridors seemed endless, and each step was echoed in silence, adding sinisterness. Ralph looked at carefully, realizing the potential danger of this place to the city. He suggested examining the dungeon to make sure that it is hiding demons or other threatening creatures. Alpha and Elsa, standing in front of the entrance to the dungeon, decided not to waste time to make sure that it was a threat to the city. She realized that if it was really a goblin's shelter, she would be able to fulfill their destruction at the same time and ensure the safety of locals. Everyone froze for a moment, directing his views on a burning torch in his hand. It seemed like a light breeze was barely blowing on one side. Elsa, noticing his focus, asked that he was worried. Alf explained that he felt a light breeze, which seemed strange in a closed dungeon. Suddenly, Elsa ordered him to retreat, and he immediately noticed a stretched fishing line right behind her. He saved Els loudly, but she had already reacted. In one movement, she destroyed the wall, and a hidden room opened in front of them. He stared intently into the sphere, reflecting on its purpose and magical nature. Carefully approaching the artifact, Ralph noticed that there was no trace on it. His fingers lightly touched the crystal, when suddenly the silence cut into loud mechanical sounds. Elsa tiredly looked at the noise, and Ralph realized that he activated the trap. Galagoons with old swords and daggers began to come out of the dark corners of the room. Their sockets were burning with threatening red light, causing a spooky contrast to the darkness. He quickly grabbed the sword and began to desperately cut the skeletons, trying to protect himself and Els. Each blow turned one skeleton into ashes, but new ones were replaced. The battle became more fierce. At some point, one of the particularly fast and strong skeletons raised his sword over Elsa. Noticing this, he reacted instantly, cutting off the enemy in half. The bones broke to the ground, losing the magical power that kept them together. As the situation was aware, Ralph realized that they got into a well-planned trap. Swapping his tension, Elsa apologized for her negligence, but Ralph assured her that everything was fine. He realized that he was too early to relax, so he suggested to continue the study of the dungeon, but with increased care. Going narrow corridors, they suddenly stopped in front of a small hole in the wall. Fascinated by what she saw, she approached the stone wolf and cautiously touched him. But as soon as everything around the bright light shone, Elsa threw back. People seeing this cried with horror, but the light instantly disappeared, and the stone statue dissolved in the air. Their eyes are accustomed to the darkness again. On the marble floor in the center of the room, they noticed a small black wolf, wrapped in a light that gradually scattered. The little wolf was breathing hard, and his black wool was covered with blood spots. Elsa looked at him with horror and despair in her eyes. Rolf, without spending time, got out of his pocket the healing pill, which they recently made. The researchers tried to give the wolf pill, but the bleeding did not stop. Rolf exclaimed to her, calling for the use of the wolf's destruction skill. The embarrassed and alarmed Elsa confessed that she could not do it because she is afraid that the wolf would simply disappear. She felt guilty of what happened, but Rolf strongly interrupted her reflections. Assurances to save him. Alpha assured her that since the beginning of their joint trip, his ability to restore the destroyed has improved significantly. He expressed faith in his skills and asked Elsa to trust him. Elsa, without hesitation in her gaze, looked at Rolf. His confidence and determination gave her the faith that everything would be fine. She nodded, confirming trust, and they intertwined her hands, forming a strong union of their skills. In an instant, when Elsa gently touched the wolf, activating her destructive skill, Ralph simultaneously used the ability to recover. The system immediately reported that his skill removed the seal, holding back the legendary demonic wolf, with 100% quality. He faced a difficult choice, realizing that the only way out was to use his recovery skill to save a little black wolf. Realizing that he has only one way out, he decided to use the skill to completely restore the wolf. The bright light reaped them again, filling the whole room. It was so dazzling that Ralphoff had to cover her eyes. The light finally went out, and they gently opened their eyes, seeing a little black wolf in front of them. It joyfully caught its tail, and gratitude in the eyes glowed. Ralph and Elsa froze from surprise, realizing that they had saved the wolf and discovered something more important than the usual dungeon. Closing tears of joy, she hugged a little black wolf, feeling relieved that he was saved. She reappeared to herself again, feeling his little heart beat next to her. The little animal, as if feeling her emotions, came to life, filling the room with joyful sounds. Watching this scene, he could not contain smiles. Feeling pride for his ability to restore, his mind, however, began to be clouded in doubts about the future. Wolf was a demon, and the consequences remained a mystery. She looked at Ralph with a spark in her eyes, winked with him, and offered to leave the wolf with him. She noted that the wolf seems to have loved the city, and with a smile added that all this was due to Ralph. Elsa, having nodded, noted that the name suits him just perfectly. Ralph agreed, adding that it was really sweet. Suddenly, they were distracted by some loud shout. He barely took a breath. The excitement was displayed on the face. Ralph immediately asked what had happened. Monty said that the day before he purchased several medicinal herbs from a rich supplier, and today a man bought them all, showing great interest in their origin. Ralph and his friends were stunned by the news. They did not know how to react and what to do in this unusual situation. He was silent, trying to hide embarrassment. It was he who turned the plants collected with Elsa into this legendary grass. Ralph realized that his ability to create such valuable things could have a serious problem if others learn about it. Use your abilities for personal self-serving purposes. The money, seeing their anxiety, tried to reassure Ralph. He assured them that the buyer is a reliable person who can be trusted. Everyone was stunned by the unexpected news from the demon. It turned out that this man was a red-eyed Bernard. At that moment, a woman appeared behind them. Returning, Ralph and Elsa saw her smiling. She exclamedly exclaimed that her charming kids were standing in front of her. The great blue sorceress Vanessa looked carefully at Alpha and Elsa, clearly demonstrating interest and curiosity. She noted that the ability to find such valuable medicinal herbs indicates their extraordinary strength and talents. Watching the surprise on Elsa's face, 12 explained to her that Vanessa was Bernard's partner. Suddenly he realized that if Vanessa was here, then Bernard himself had to be somewhere nearby. Seeing this miracle, Rissy began to bark loudly, jumping around the rabbit. It was a red-eyed Bernard. His look was deep and piercing as heaven. To reassure the puppy, Elsa immediately ordered Rice to stop barking. NASA approached Bernard and, pointing to Ralph and Elsa, said they were those children who found medicinal herbs for them. And Art examined them carefully, his gaze radiated true interest. Accidentally come across it in the forest. His look was gloomy, his eyes glittered suspicion. But Ralph, without taking his gaze, with confidence repeated that they were accidentally. Howard looked insightfully, as if trying to look into the soul of Ralph, looking for the slightest hint of lies. He began to explain that in order to achieve such a high level of the plant should feed the mana from the soil. If the herbs reach a legendary quality, it indicates the extraordinary richness of Manai soil. He smiled, but in his gaze there was a hidden threat. He suggested that Ralph show them a place, promising a generous reward for it. Ralph, a little hesitation, apologized, and admitted that he could not accurately remember the path to the lawn. He also explained that his skill not only restores objects, but also improves their level, properties, and quality. Bernard, amazed at the herd, admitted that he had never heard about the same. Leonardo clenched his lips and shook his head with a gloomy expression, showing how much he was disappointed with the fact that such a place could go unnoticed. Suddenly, it was determined to change the situation. He offered Ralph 3 million money, and when it did not make the impression, he raised the amount to 5 million. In front of such an incredible amount, Ralph simply took a breath. But at the same time he realized that he could not succumb to this temptation. Vanessa, standing nearby, turned to Bernard and reminded that Ralph could not tell where the lawn was. As if not hearing it, Bernard raised the rate of up to 7 million guards. Bernard sighed heavily and noted that such a treasure should not be lost in the wild. And although in his voice there was a request to Ralph, the expression of the face gave the unwavering determination of a person who was accustomed to seeking his own. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by the voice behind. It was Figaro, known in the city thanks to his wealth and ambition. He, looking at Ralph and Elsa with a respectful look, noted that it is not necessary to waste time with these adventurers, and invited everyone to his estate. His manner was powerful, and he did not suffer. Bernard hesitated when he looked at Figaro, but could not ignore the invitation of such an influential man. Without waiting for consent, Figaro added that today she suits a solemn feast in his honor, where everyone will be able to see his grandeur. It was both a compliment and an order. Ralph and Elsa felt uncomfortable under such a meticulous look. Almani, having noticed tension, immediately suggested that guests be held to the estate. Meanwhile, Rice, a little black wolf, felt a threat to Figaro's presence and began to growl. Figaro, hearing this, looked intently at the puppy and strictly demanded Ralph to quench his pet. Figaro quickly quenched Rissy, ordered to stop growling. Then he approached Bernard and clapped him on his shoulder. His movements were very confident and a little aggressive. Figaro's hand invited Bernard to go with him, although he did not want to. She watched this scene with a barely noticeable smile. When Figaro and Bernard departed, she quietly noted that even Figaro could sometimes be useful. Ralph laughed with her, feeling relieved that it was possible to avoid a tense conversation with Bernard. Recalling the need to find an overnight stay, he turned to Elsa and noted that they should decide where to stay at night. Longing himself next to Rice, who faithfully waved his tail, he noted that they would not be released into the Inuit wolf's cup. Elsa nodded, realizing the need to find a place to stay overnight. She smiled and asked Ralph how he was treating a small camping. Ralph was surprised, but the idea seemed quite reasonable to him. He noted that they will be harder to find them in the city, especially Ralph Grid. Ralph himself was not delighted with the prospect of meeting Bernard and his partner again. They decided to go to the guild to take a task that would be a reason to leave the city. Field, Ralph and Elsa have chosen the tasks of clearing the dungeons, which involved the destruction of goblins and harvesting healing herbs. This task was a great choice to avoid extra attention. They soon went on the road, fully armed and ready for new adventures. After installing the tent, Ralph began to wear a new, beautiful black collar, which he specifically purchased for a wolf puppy. Rissy ran around, happily sniffed around, and from time to time she was happily barking. Just completed the preparation of dinner, and the aromas of freshly cooked food were filled with air. Ralph, sitting by the fire, looked at food with delight, shouting that she was looking extremely appetizing. They started enjoying dinner. Ralph noticed that Elsa was able to find many delicious dishes even in the most unexpected places. Rice was also pleased with his portion, eagerly absorbing food. Elsa, smiling and winking Ralph, gladly noted that her skills of archery were talking for themselves. At such moments, Ralph was aware of what kind of happiness to have such a faithful girlfriend and a reliable associate as Elsa. The night in the forest was quiet and calm. Only the sounds of night animals and the crackling of the fire violated silence. Ralph and Elsa sat by the fire, immersed in reflections on past days. Ralph suggested Elga to go to the lake tomorrow to gather healing herbs. Elsa, smiling, agreed, emphasizing that it is worth going to sleep earlier, because tomorrow it took a lot of effort to accomplish all tasks. The flame of the fire gently illuminated their faces, creating comfort among the night silence of the forest. Suddenly, Elsa returned to Ralph. Her eyes glowed with thoughtfulness. She whispered carefully, having a request for him. Ralph looked at her in surprise, waiting for her words. After calming down, she kneeled and quietly confessed that she always fell asleep on her father's knees as a child. Her voice was filled with warm memories, and she asked Raoul to let this ritual repeat. He felt tenderness, and began to gently stroke her on her head. And Elsa, closing her eyes, soon plunged into the world of dreams. Morning came with the first rays of the sun, breaking through the tent cloth. Ralph suddenly woke up from strange growths and sounds. Barely opened his eyes, he died for a moment and listened. Quickly jumping out of the tent and noticing an alarmed reality, he realized that something was wrong. The reassessment, wary of growling, stared at one point. Elsa, waking up from the screams of Ralph, was scared, got out of the tent and stood next to him. Both noticed a group of people standing right in front of them. Among them was Gado with several satellites. He sharply reported that they were expelled from the Golden Lions precisely through Ralph and me, Elsa. Arya, standing nearby, added that now they will feel on their own skin as it is to be exiles. He recognized them and realized that they came to take revenge on the ancient incident. Godot, burning rage in his eyes, ordered Ralph to apologize. He strictly repeated the order to apologize and confessed that Mr. Crusher was deceived. He added that if Ralph asks them to return to the guild, they may have pity them. Squeezing the sword in his hands, he confidently stated that they did not deceive Figaro, and were not going to apologize for what they did not do. Hearing Ralph renounced, the converting broke to the attack, howling and shouting that he would not pass and he would die. The attacker sharply stopped by his sword on Ralph, but he easily repelled the blow and, deftly using the knife, split the enemy's weapon into pieces. The convoy, counting on the unexpected, tried to attack the Ralph from the rear, but he was immediately stopped with a capacious stroke on the shield. Blinded by the speed and power of Ralph, in a few seconds all the attackers were crushed on the ground. They plunged into surprise, trying to understand where he had such power and skills. Outraged, they felt humiliated. Raising a heavy Dobney from the ground, they realized that their opponent had gained strength since their last meeting. Having looked carefully at Ralph's sword and noticing his sharp blade, Gatto decided to attack, directing his blow directly on Ralph with a clear intention of killing him. He realized that he would inevitably face this danger, taking into account the experience and skills of Gatto in the art of fencing. However, he was ready to fight. With a powerful blow, their swords collided, soaking the air with sparks, and each was accompanied by a tense exclamation. Watching Ralph cope with Gatto, the converting began to declare loudly that Ralph was not worth his opponent and remains ordinary. Ralph, hearing it, lit indignation. Gentle, approaching him, whispered to his ear that he was only temporary. At the same moment, the Genti attacked, knocking out the sword from the hands of Ralph. The weapon fell and stuck in the ground, forcing Ralph to retreat from the unexpected turn of events. She alertly kept the onion tight, aiming at Gatto. She suddenly lost her balance. Something moved behind, accompanied by rustles. Noticing that the representative of power was moving to her, she screamed, trying to warn. At the same moment, the branch wrapped around the body of Elsa, gradually squeezing it stronger. Unhappy with her subordinates, she annoyed that their helplessness makes them unable to cope with even Ralph and Elsa. Stunned with reproaches, they felt humiliation because their leader achieved a golden rank with their own example, and they remained unable to cope with the task. The branches continued to squeeze Elsa, and she began to suffocate. Gudote, seeing that the situation became uncontrollable, shouted to the Arya, warning that he would kill the girl if she did not stop. Suddenly the sharp blade of the sword pierces the prickly branches, freeing Els. The unexpected appearance of Vanessa and Bernard was suddenly caught by all who were present. The atmosphere suddenly changed when Arya, casting an angry look at Vanessa, exclaimed, accusing her of destroying her magic. Vanessa, with a barely noticeable smile, calmly replied that Arya's magic looks great, and that she has something special for Arya. Almost instantly, she blindfolded her ears with her magic, and they immediately appeared on the head of Arya. Vanessa warned her that if it was impossible to remove this spell, then with the ears will have to stay forever. Meanwhile, Bernard drew his attention to Ralph and Elsa. He heard numerous rumors about them and decided to understand. Turning to Godot, Bernard suggested leaving Elsa and Ralph alone in exchange for the promise to forget everything he saw. Hearing Bernard's proposal and realizing that the situation was out of control, the hero nodded approved. Moving back, he looked at Ralph and Elsa gloomfully and stated that he would talk to Figaro before any further actions. It sounded as a promise, or even a threat, leaving them in hard expectation. At this point, Ralph, realizing that the fight was temporarily over, turned to Bernard and sincerely thanked for his help. Bernard, with a barely noticeable smile, replied that gratitude was superfluous, because he was also looking for Ralph. His gaze was carefully appreciated Ralph and Elsa, defining their condition and combat skills, as if he had already made an important decision. His interest in Ralph and Elga was not simple curiosity, but part of his attempt to continue his negotiations. He tried to convince them of his proposal, which, in his opinion, could change their lives for the better, offering to become brave traders. Bernard explained that their skills in combat and survival in wild terrain can be extremely useful for its purpose. He was convinced that people such as Ralph and Elsa could become indispensable partners. Ralph, still impressed by the recent clash and salvation, looked at Bernard in surprise. Marquard's proposal seemed very attractive and promising, especially after all experienced. Ralph and Elsa exchanged views, healing to an important choice, to continue the path full of fights and dangers, or to try something new that could bring stability and even peace of mind. Innard assured that he was ready to support Ralph and Elsa in their endeavors. After that, we turned to the rest and offered to complete the discussion at this place, inviting everyone to his room. Ralph, looking interested in Ralph, asked what to do next. Ralph suggested that maybe Bernard and his companion would like to know more about the legendary plant they were looking for. He added that once the task is completed, then they should join it. Elsa agreed, but she was still interested in why adventurers needed them. He did not know the answer, and suggested that he still leave his special abilities in secret. Elsa nodded, agreeing. After a short trip, they reached a huge train that was exactly the one that Bernard spoke of. Ralph was excited, because it was here that, near this impressive train, they were to meet. They were not offered to rise on board, but they still went inside. The interior of the train was impressed with the size and luxury. Bernard was slightly removed, inviting them to enter, and explained that he was using this attraction as a place for relaxation and a warehouse for his treasures. He added that there are 10 horses ready for any adventure. He proudly told that the building of his train is made of mythril, one of the strongest and most rare materials in the world. Due to this, the train became virtually invulnerable to the attacks of monsters that could meet on their way. Over led them into the depths of the train, where there were huge repositories, filled with many barrels and boxes. Nasak, looking at sarcasm, noted that there was nothing to wonder Bernard's poverty, because he put all his money on this train. And yet she noted that they now have a cozy comfort and spacious bed. By inviting Ralph and Elsa to sit down as soon as they settled on soft sofas, he began a conversation. NASA also assured that no one could listen to their conversation here, which further strengthened the feeling of rest and safety. The interlocutors were thought to learn about the medicinal plants they collect. However, Bernard suddenly stated that he was not interested in it at all, which was much surprised by Ralph. Suddenly, in the silence of a cozy crew, Bernard calmly said with unexpected admiration that he was only interested in Ralph. These words were heard as a thunder in the clear sky. Ralph and Elsa have frozen, surprised by such revelation, not knowing how to answer such a direct question. Their views met, and anxiety and misunderstanding flashed in Elsa's eyes. Hart, without waiting for their reaction, continued, explaining that Mr. Figaro told him everything. He said that, as far as he knows, Ralph really has a very rare skill in regeneration, which is of great value. Ralph, a little embarrassed, nodded in agreement. However, immediately then, his shoulders dropped, his head dropped, and he confessed that, despite the presence of this skill, he had never been able to activate him. In the voice of Betonus, sadness was felt when he told that it was the cause of his expulsion from the Golden Lion Guild. I listened carefully, but his face remained impenetrable. He noted that he had already heard about it, and asked how things were being settled. His words were as if he knew much more than demonstrated. He continued, saying that he knew not only the exile of Ralph, but also how they won Ogre and Elsa, found medicinal herbs, and even found a new dungeon. His words seemed to have penetrated to the very essence of all the events. They exchanged the amazed views, not believing that Bernard knows so many details about their recent adventures. Bernard, noticing their astonishment, continued to look directly into the eyes, emphasizing the importance of every word. He noted that Ralph and Elsa were the main figures of these events. He noticed that in the last few days Ralph and Elsa had changed, and this has caused him suspicion. Looking closer, he suggested that these changes were some unusual circumstances. Bernard sincerely admitted that he did not believe in the story of a random find of the legendary herbs. In his opinion, it is simply incredible. His gaze stopped at Ralph, and he sharply noted that it was Ralph who improved the grass thanks to his unique abilities. Ralph stood silently in front of him, not knowing what to answer. He felt revealed and invulnerable. It was puzzled that no one ever learned how Ralph's skill works. However, Bernard, watching them for a few days, was able to guess on their own. Watching Bernard began to understand that this world was full of legendary heroes, such as Redkind Bernard, whose abilities and skills exceeded all ideas. Finally, Ralph nodded and asked to talk to Elsa alone. Bernard, realizing the importance of this moment, immediately agreed. Elsa left the train, leaving Bernard and her thoughts behind. Hardly holding back joy, she noticed that they were simply incredible, because they guessed his ability instantly. Ralph, taking her hand, calmly noted that this was what he wanted to discuss with her. Their views overwhelmed mutual understanding and support. After a few minutes, they returned to the carriage. Bernard, seeing them, was surprised that they had so soon completed their conversation. Elsa took her place, and Rolf, gathering with the spirit, stated that he was ready to demonstrate his skills. However, under one condition: it should remain a secret. Bernard, as if respectful and quite seriousness, agreed to his demands. Bill returned to Bernard with interest and wondered whether something was damaged. Bernard's sudden curiosity in this topic was surprised, and he thought about possible cases of breakage. Vanessa, finding herself in the spotlight, mentioned the morning incident with a broken cup. Vanessa brought the fragments of the cup to the table where Ralph stood, and he gratefully accepted them. He carefully examined the broken cup, then turned to Elsa and took her hand. Meanwhile, Elsa touched the cup with her fingers and accidentally activated her ability to destroy. The product flew into many debris. Bernard was fascinated by what was seen, and Ralph explained that Elsa has the ability to. Hearing Ralph's explanation, she realized that even everyday actions, such as walking without gloves or touching with bare hands, became complex and problematic for Elsa. These words forced Elsa to bow their head. Noticing her embarrassment, he smiled calmingly and stressed that he could touch her without any consequences. He carefully took her hand, and Bernard and Vanessa were shocked. This was contrary to everything they had just learned. At that moment, holding her hand, Ralph activated his own ability. The cup, converted to dust, began to gradually recover. Its wreckage began to merge, turning the object to its original appearance, as if it were time moving back. Bernard looked at it with surprise and admiration, unable to believe what was happening right in his eyes. With a sense of confidence in his voice, began to talk about his abilities. He revealed that his unique skill is called regeneration. Due to this ability, it can neutralize the destructive effects of Elsa's skills by returning objects to their original state. Immersed in his reflections, Innard tried to grasp the entire depth of Herd. Ralph, noticing his embarrassment, continued to explain that his skills not only restored damaged objects, but also discovered their true value. Having examined the recovered cup, he immediately realized that it was made of rare ceramic glass and costs at least 10,000 garden. Hard's eyes lit up, as if he had just realized something important, hidden in these words. Continuing, he noted that his ability did not work on his own. It works only in combination with the destructive force of Elsa, forming a synergistic effect. Ralph continued to explain, giving examples. He told how he used his talent on medicinal herbs, significantly increasing their healing properties. After exposure to his ability, these herbs have become much more effective. Bernard, listening, nodded slowly, aware of the strength and potential of such ability. Nasa, who still listened carefully, smiled unexpectedly and noted that their common skill looks very romantic. However, Ralph looked at her seriously and emphasized that his ability was carrying some dangers. He told that he could create legendary objects from the simplest things. Hearing this, Bernard suddenly realized that such an ability could be an object of desire and even be used for military purposes if declassified. Ralph, nodding, confirmed his assumption. Suddenly, Garda became clear that if Ralph began to sell his unique magical products, it would inevitably attract unwanted attention. People will want to find out where they are and who manufactures them. At the same time, Ralph, as if reading Bernard's thoughts, confidently stated that they had already discussed this issue with Elsa. He explained that they agreed to become brave merchants and sell their goods, but only under one important condition. They will only do with the support and advice of Bernard. Having realized the seriousness of the situation, Bernard nodded in agreement. Ralph decided to share with them part of his history, saying that his parents were also bold adventurers. In their youth, they accepted the task from the guild and went on a long journey. Since then, Ralph is convinced that his parents are still traveling the world. That is why Ralph decided to become a traveler. Not only to see the world, but may also meet his parents. The story of the DIPOK and the gestures of all those present reinforced the atmosphere in the room, making it even more tense. Suddenly, Ralph, gathering all his courage, asked Bernard to join their company. His eyes were determined, and sincere hope sounded in his voice. Bernard, feeling the authenticity of Ralph's intentions, agreed without hesitation, feeling that this man would become a valuable ally. Turning to Elsa, Bernard wondered if she did not object to this decision. Elsa, with a smile and warmth in her voice, said she would always be near Ralph, supporting him in any endeavors. Also then, she gently took a little wolf named Rice in her arms, and with a gentle smile, added that he would also become part of the team. As if understanding the importance of the moment, he gently cried to her. Vanessa came closer, gently stroked the wolf, and passionately expressed his joy from meeting a new member of the group, admiring his fluffy wool and charming eyes. However, Vanessa soon focused on a more practical question. Noticing that in their modest shelter only 2 beds, she with a slight smile stated that it means a joint dream with Bernard. He, stunned by frankness, frozen, not knowing what to say. Vanessa, despite his embarrassment, turned to Ralph and Elsa with a proposal to take Bernard's bed, which remained free. Realizing that he and Elga would have to sleep together, Ralph felt his cheeks blushing. He tried to hide embarrassment, but Vanessa, noticing it, asked him excitedly if he was feeling awkward. Not knowing where to go, he muttered something indistinguishable, and Vanessa laughed fun, enjoying his embarrassment. Elsa suddenly turned her gaze to Bernard and Vanessa and asked about whether they were married. Bernard was stunned by such an unexpected question and froze, unable to answer immediately. Instead, Panas, keeping calm and smile, noted that they were not yet married, but she did not mind. However, in her opinion, Bernard is not yet ready for such a step, and she is occupied by the study of magic. Having recovered from surprise, Bernard added that they were colleagues, and even if they get married, their relationship and joint work will remain unchanged. Understanding and accepting her position, she nodded. At this point, Vanessa came behind to Bernard and hugged him, feeling the warmth of his body through his clothes. Vanessa gently asked what he wanted for dinner, playfully teasing her closeness. Bernard, with the inflow of blood to the cheeks from embarrassment, asked her to stop. With pleasure watching his reaction, Vanessa began to leave the room. She looked at Elsa, asking whether she wanted and helped with dinner. Elsa gladly agreed and followed her, leaving Ralph alone. Once upon a time, when Ralph was expelled from the Golden Lions, he was convinced that his adventure-seeker's career ended forever. However, now he was in a group with the world-famous adventurer Bernard, and felt part of something great. During a joint dinner, Ralph realized that he could not think about such wonderful events. Every day he was increasingly convinced that exciting adventures were waiting for them, and his heart was filled with joyful expectations. The next morning, open his eyes, Ralph felt something gentle and soft near his face. Ralph looked around in surprise and found that there was something oily near his head. Getting out of bed, he noticed Risi instantly won a vacancies near Elsa, comforting him near her. According to the next thought, what is the most important thing you can do? At this time, Nessa entered, greeted Ralph on a good morning. Вона випросталася, хоч все ще не до кінця прокинулася. Noticing his serious facial expression, Nessa smiled and noted that the duty of a real man was to take responsibility. A little confused, he did not quite understand what responsibility she spoke about. Ральф знітився, відчуваючи, як збільшується його збентеження. Bernard approached them and, smiling unobtrusively, asked Vanessa to stop Ralph. You, having a little angry with Bernard, suddenly asked that it was a noise last night. Bernard, ніби не розуміючи, про що йдеться, лише знизав плечима. At that moment, Elsa woke up from their conversations and got out of bed, trying to understand what was happening. Noticing that Elsa woke up, she was offered to refresh everyone, to go to the bathroom and take a shower before a new day. She lightly smashed Bernard's hair, forcing him to be embarrassed to stop it. He still tried to master himself and stated that he no longer wanted to take a soul. He asked Vanessa to stop his jokes, and then he even shouted that he would not stop. But his words were faster than threatening. At this point, the room was filled with loud snoring and everyone laughed, realizing that they were waiting for a new day in front of them, full of adventures and challenges. The first day of Elsa and Ralph as traders began. They exchanged smiles, feeling that something great was waiting for them. Their journey had just begun, and they were tuned to move forward, supporting each other in all situations. With each step, their connection was stronger, turning them into a real team ready for any trials. Garos carefully rubbed his new armor, which glittered in the morning sun. His face shone with a pleased smile that reflected inner peace and confidence. Only one of the guards broke into the room, pouring a space with a look full of horror, and exclaimed that there were problems. Figaro, instantly alerted, turned around and demanded explanations. Previously, Ralph and Bernard entered the guild, attracting general attention. The girl behind the resistant, familiar to a variety of requests, did not expect to hear what was heard from their mouth. She, embarrassed, asked to clarify their request again. The girl carefully read the document stating that the Ralph group decided to become traders and joined the Bernard group. She looked up at them, full of surprise. Bernard, standing next to Ralph, confidently confirmed her words. causing even more surprise among others. The surprise that quickly spread throughout the hall. Anyone who heard the news could not believe their ears. They wondered how possible that he, having, seemingly in vain, was able to persuade Bernard to accept him in his group. Carol, trying to hide the surprise, smiled and invited Ralph to sign the document. Ralph, barely noticeably nervous, raised his hand to sign, and suddenly someone stopped him unexpectedly. The unexpected appearance of Figaro gave rise to a wave of whispers and tension in the hall. With a serious face expression, Figaro approached Bernard, pierced him with his gaze, and directly asked if he really said. The hero continued, calling Ralph complete worthlessness, claiming that he would in no way benefit the team. Trying to maintain calm, he strongly stated that Ralph would join their team as a cargo carrier. He added that this new appointment does not cause any objection and is important for the coordinated work of the team. Figaro, it is unclear how Bernard could make such a decision, annoyedly noted that the office of the receptionist can be found anyone, and Ralph will only disgrace their honor with his empty promises and inability to be useful. These words were severely angry, because he always sought to be honest and never deceived anyone. Seeing the rage in Ralph's eyes, he strongly stated that the figure was wrong. He remembered how Ralph was kicked out of Golden Lions, and it was because of this that he decided to accept him to his society of merchants. Bernard believed in the potential of Ralph and sought to give him the opportunity to confirm his value. He believed that everyone deserves a second chance, especially the one who has already experienced difficulty and injustice. With a strict look, Figaro looked at Bernard inquiringly and strongly invited him to join the Golden Lions Guild. His proposal sounded convincing. Voice radiated confidence. However, Bernard, while keeping peace, explained that he still had many unfinished cases and apologized that he cannot accept such a generous offer. There was a surprised whisper in the hall. No one expected such a decision. To give up an invitation to the Golden Lions was unprecedented. Everyone froze in anticipation when Bernard firmly repeated that Figaro could not accept the proposal. The faces of the attendees were overwhelmed with surprise and admiration, because no one would risk giving up such a prestigious guild. Feeling a prick on self-esteem, Figaro nodded and noted that Bernard seems to not take his guild seriously. Irony noted that the apparent change in the state of Bernard occurred with the advent of a small hem, that he seems to him as if he is nothing now. The girl, with a clear annoyance in her voice, stated that in this case she wanted to make an official statement. From that moment, the forces and the family stopped any relationship with the Bernard group. Silence reigned in the hall, and all the eyes were glued to this dramatic scene. Figaro, having clenched his fists, tried to cope with his anger. Without saying a word, he resolutely left the guild, slamming the door so that he was heard throughout the district. He was concerned about what happened. He looked at Bernard and wondered if everything would be fine. Bernard, seeking to reassure him, explained that Figaro's father is the head of the family, and even if they do not come across an agreement, they will have enough other trading partners. With a light smile added that you should not worry too much, and you can give Figaro a little. Behind the rack, noticing how the tension gradually decreases, he proposed to continue registration of documents. With gratitude in his eyes, feeling the warmth of support from new comrades, he took a deep breath, gathering all his courage and determination, and confidently signed the document. This gesture has become a symbol of its official joining to a bold adventure trafficker company. The girl behind the stable, noticing his determination, smiled and greeted Ralph, announcing that he was now officially recognized in this status. Standing nearby, he extended his hand with an expression of confidence and hope for successful cooperation. He clenched his hand firmly, feeling the strength and support in this gesture. This moment became decisive for his new road. They were overwhelmed by solid views full of determination and belief in the future. Bernard Lee looked at the counter and, with a serious look, turned to the girl for a steady guild. Her eyes radiated the experience and confidence that came with years of work in such a place. Trying to stay decisive, Bernard politely asked if they had magical crystals. Negotiating professionalism, she thoughtfully lifted her eyebrows. Having pulled several thick books and documents from under the counter, she began to view them carefully. A few minutes later, she looked around and reported that about 3,000 magical crystals are currently stored in the warehouse. Bernard, accustomed to major deals, was slightly surprised. However, he quickly mastered himself, smiled, and confidently announced that he would buy them all. Of course, without waiting for such a big order, she frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend what he heard. Her eyes expanded with surprise, but quickly returned to professional endurance and nodded politely. The background asked to handle crystals carefully, emphasizing that everyone costs 300 gardens. He wondered if this amount was satisfied. The girl sat down on her horse again, asking to wait a little to draw up all the necessary documents. This time, Ralph, who stood nearby, looked at Bernard and asked if everything was fine, because such a large number of crystals seemed excessive to him. Bernard, smiling gently, explained that when Ralph absorbs the strength of these crystals, he would be able to develop his regeneration skills. He assured Ralph that it was an important investment in his future. He also explained that the monster erupts a comprehensive flame of such force that they have already lost the hope of overcoming it. The words caused a deep sense of gratitude to Ralph, and he was already going to thank Bernard as someone else suddenly approached him. It was Guildmaster, Mr. Fran. Fran, a man with impressive appearance, wise eyes, and confident posture, greeted them. He barely smiled noticeably and asked Bernard if he was really going to buy all the magical crystals. Bernard confirmed. Bernard went behind the conductor to the shaded corner of the warehouse, where there were massive barrels filled with shining magical crystals. Their light was gently reflected on the wooden walls, creating a mysterious and charming atmosphere. France whispered that the guild does not know how to use these crystals. He noted that if they are thrown away, wild beasts can reach them and become dangerous monsters. Bernard confidently assured his friend that they would turn with crystals cautiously and responsibly. Considering the expressions of Bernard and Ralph's faces, he asked with a slight suspicion in his voice why they were so many crystals. Ralph, feeling tension, thought that Bernard would say in response. However, while keeping calm, Bernard confidently stated that he would find a decent use of crystals. Unfortunately, he could not reveal all the secrets because he fulfilled the request of one acquaintance. He cheered the answer, he barely smiled, and assured of full trust in Bernard. He promised to prepare all the necessary documents and crystals for transmission. He thanked Franu for his cooperation and asked him to withdraw for crystals from the guild personal account. Fran, without inserting words, nodded and began to record important data. However, before Bernard stepped back, France suddenly called him. In the eyes of France, seriousness and perseverance were reflected when he reported with restraint that he had a small request. He explained quietly that a new dungeon was discovered near the city. Since then, monsters began to appear in the vicinity, and he sought to get as much information about it as possible. He noted that the only one who could accomplish this task was Bernard, the best adventurer in the city. So Franz, with a voice that called for action, asked if he could count on his help. Bernard exchanged his views with him, reflecting on the idea of exploring a dangerous dungeon. Realizing the complexity of training, Bernard listened carefully to Fran, thought for a moment, and stated strongly that he was accepting the proposal. However, he asked a little time to prepare, realizing that this mission requires careful processing of the plan. As a remuneration for the task, Bernard invited 3 million gardens, and in case of successful completion, he promised to raise the amount to 4 million. The friend, understanding the validity of the requirements, nodded and assured that he would prepare everything he needed for this difficult mission. France gratefully noted the consent of Bernard and added that he would also like to reward Ralph for his significant contribution to the opening of the dungeon. He emphasized that Ralph's research information can move much faster and more successfully. France offered Ralph 2.5 million coins and the right to pick up everything they will find in the dungeon. Moreover, in the case of successful cleaning of the France's dungeon, he promised to pay an additional 3 million coins, which made this proposal even more attractive. Ralph Lowe looked at Bernard, realizing the importance of this proposal. He immediately agreed. He realized that it was not only a wonderful chance for the team, but also an opportunity for him to demonstrate his skills and develop. Ralph nodded with gratitude and suggested his experience and knowledge to help in the hike through the dungeon. Leonardo, assessing the importance of the proposed assistance, nodded again and added that they were accepting requests. French thanked for the determination and desire to accept the challenge. He saw relief in Leonardo's eyes and hoped that it was tea. The man carefully folded the barrels with crystals. His hands were confidently sliding on the smooth wooden surfaces, carefully fixing them. Each crystal was important, because every barrel with a valuable cargo could be crucial for their future. Time passed, and finally after the loading of Ralph came off the train. Light sweat changed on his face, but his eyes glowed with pleasure. Going to Bernard, he calmly announced the successful completion of crystals. Bernard, gratitude in his eyes, praised Ralph for his efforts and diligence, understanding the importance of this part of the mission. After that, Bernard recalled that Vanessa and Elsa went to the armed store and suggested that Ralph join them. Bernard, realizing that the preparation for the trip needs significant investments, pulled out a small bag with money and handed it to Ralph. Feeling the heaviness of coins in the palm of hand, Ralph realized that it was a symbol of Bernard's trust, and this question caused a short-term confusion of Bernard. He could not understand why Ralph, having a chance to buy a new brilliant weapon, preferred the old and used. However, in Ralph's words, he felt certainty and habitual intonation, which made Bernard think, "Thank you for being with us." Everyone looked at him with such confidence that Bernard's doubts were slightly dispelled. In this look, something that convinced him of the correct decision of Ralph was visible. He may have been guided by the experience or knowledge that Bernard has not yet realized. In the end, he decided to rely on a friend and agreed, giving Ralph complete freedom to acquire everything he would see fit. Ralph felt joy and relief. It was important for him that his elections and decisions be accompanied by understanding and support. Being on the threshold of a new task as a merchant and adventurer, he was aware that he needed not only skills, but also, they pampered and went to the arsenal. On the way, Ralph wondered his choice. He imagined how he chooses swords and daggers, carefully checking their balance, sharpness, and convenience in his hand. Entering the armory, Ralph was immediately intercepted. Having apologized for the delay, he looked up and froze from surprise. Elsa and Vanessa stood in front of him in his clothes, which was more suitable for the holiday than for the battle. Vanessa asked Ralph with a smile whether he likes what Elsa looks like in her new outfit. Ralph, struck by an unexpected view, turned away immediately, feeling his face filled with a blush. He tried to find out why they were so dressed, but his thoughts were confused. Noticing his embarrassment, Nasa explained that she just wanted to dress Elsa a little and make a variety in their everyday business. Still smiling, she suggested waiting for them externally so that they could focus on the choice of weapons. Ralph and Elsa nodded approved, and Vanessa went outside. Left too, Ralph and Elsa returned to the main task. Soon Ralph took several samples and carefully put them on the counter. Seeing their choice, Smith smiled warmly and spoke. He noted that he had heard about their present work by merchants under the direction of Mr. Bernard, and offered a special discount. The bunnik carefully examined the old swords and daggers that Ralph posted on the counter. Raising eyebrows from surprise, he asked why they needed those old blades, and offered new, shiny blades instead. Ralph, full of confidence, replied that they were quite satisfied with the existing arsenal. Remember, as the determination in Ralph's gaze, he noted that they are strange guys, but at the same time revered clients. Ralph continued to inspect the rows of weapons exhibited along the walls of the store. His gaze lingered on the corner where the old and trimmed swords, daggers, and other weapons were chaotically scattered. They were noticeably larger than during the... Seeing the weapon was surprised, he nodded, and explained that Mr. Bernard asked him to gather as many weapons as possible. However, forged armor continued to surprise, so he became interested and asked why they were so many old weapons. Smiling, he replied that the weapon was intended for one nobleman. The confidence in his voice added to the appropriate weight, and he realized that it sounds quite plausible. Bruni caught his sincerity, supported and even suggested that Ralph and Bernard were being collected their own army. He smiled, imagining their arms with arms arranged a large army. He explained that all the nobles are the same in their aspirations. They are always looking for more and cheaper. In these words a slight irony was felt, and the gunsmith, realizing it, laughed. Then the master stated that he would prepare everything for transportation and started making documents and payments. After a while, Ralph and Elsa returned to Bernard's train. Ralph, a little breathtaking, immediately apologized for the delay. But his words were interrupted by Bernard, who, with approval, noted that they had done their work perfectly. For Valve, a cart, filled with boxes with all sorts of weapons and equipment, went. Bernard, assessing the purchase, confessed that they really bought a lot and asked how much it costs. Ralph, smiling slightly, replied that the amount of purchases was only 600,000 guards. Leonardo nodded and praised Ralph for his business abilities. He noted that Ralph begins to show a true crash of the merchant. Stanza standing nearby also noted Ralph, and he laughed and laughed, feeling warm and support from friends. While looking into the van, Vanessa noticed that there were only equipment and weapons inside. Her gaze stopped in an empty place where the red dress she tried on Elsa. Without reflection, with curiosity, Vanessa asked why she did not take this beautiful thing. Elsa, smiling slightly, replied that she did not need it. Her voice gave a touch of modesty and uncertainty. Nasa, dissatisfied with the answer, approached Ralph and whispered quietly to him that a real man should indulge all the girl's desire. In her words, she felt a sincere concern for his girlfriend. Elsa and Vanessa plunged into the discussion of dresses and other outfits, and Ralph, standing on the side, finally understood the importance of Vanessa's words. Gathering with his thoughts, Ralph approached Elsa with determination in his gaze. His heart pounded faster, but he was not missing. He firmly stated that he would soon become a well-known adventure seeker. That will certainly buy her everything she wants. His words were echoed with a promise filled with sincere consent and a fervent desire to make her happy. She barely smiled, hearing his statement, and in her eyes it shined warmth. She answered calmly that she didn't need all this. But he did not let her complete. Suddenly, he exclaimed that nothing would work. In his voice there was an unwavering confidence. He stated that she should always wear beautiful clothes, because he believes that she is worth it. His words breathed in passion and determination. Elsa, confused with excitement and moved by his perseverance, looked at him with gratitude. At this point, Vanessa ran up and gladly reported that Elga would help her choose her outfit. Her eyes glowed with enthusiasm and care. Elsa, feeling the support of her girlfriend, thanked her. They began to discuss the details quietly, and Ralph watched, hoping that Vanessa would choose something worthy and appropriate for Elsa. Meanwhile, the figure listened to Tetra Tari in the estate, which reported to him the latest news. Tentley calmly and confidently said that the group of Bernard went to the dungeon. Hearing the news, the figure smiled mysteriously. In the eyes, intrigue broke out. He thought about the possible consequences of this trip, realizing that the dungeons had both dangers and incredible treasures and strength for those who dare to go there. Clear forest clearings, shrouded in thick trees, hid a noble deer, which calmly scared the generous grass. The juiciness of each leaf brought him pleasure. But suddenly, his sensitive ears caught a sharp sound that tore silence. The deer frozen, alarming his ears, expanding his eyes from fear, and instantly rushed away, rapidly overcoming all the obstacles on his way, as if a crazy vortex. Meanwhile, massive wheels of a huge carriage, the size of a train, roared and creaked on a rocky road, lifting clouds of dust. Despite the grandeur of this carriage made of dark wood, decorated with graceful patterns, the whole company Bernard gathered together. Admiring the grandeur and beauty of the carriage, she could not resist the enthusiastic exclamation, claiming that this creation is simply incredible. Ralph, her loyal friend and companion, with a wide smile, lightly, Nasa looked at Bernard, and holding back a cheerful laughter, said that this carriage could go even faster. Bernard looked at her focusedly and nodded, without hesitation. The next moment, as if obeying the invisible order, the carriage sharply accelerated, leaving a long dust loop. She rushed to her purpose, a mysterious and dangerous dungeon hidden in the heart of the forest. A caravan called Bagrian Way impressed, presenting a true work of engineering. He combined not only exquisite design, but also practicality. Passengers? He probably said that the secret of a smooth course is hidden in unusually wide wheels that ensure stability and maneuverability. In addition, the trolley was incredibly easy due to the use of mythril, rare and expensive metal, the acquisition of which was a whole wealth. Vanessa, ready for sarcastic remarks, rolled her eyes and stressed with a smile that it cost even more than the whole wealth. Vanessa, using the moment, added that the interior design was her merit. She proudly emphasized that the comfort of the living space is as important as the maneuverability of the carriage, especially during distant trips. Convenience caused Ralph the idea that she immediately found a response in his heart. She suggested that he accumulate a little money and buy the same carriage to create a cozy home for their wolf, Rice. Ralph, having caught this opinion, immediately began to reflect the prospects. Imagine how they and Elsa travel in a small trolley, enjoying every moment together. This idea seems to him an extremely attractive and full romance. Suddenly, Elsa noticed that they were approaching the dungeon, and her admiration was passed on Ralph. Understanding the danger, they shouted in one voice to Bernard, demanding to stop the carriage. Bernard, pulling the bridles and straining each muscle, tried to stop the Moog horses that raced, leaving behind bloody traces. Four leisurely came out of the carriage, enjoying the last moments before the call. They found themselves on the verge of a forest lawn, where the green grass stretched smoothly into the dark earth, a mention of a recent magical storm. Ralph was the Enar, slightly lagging from others, whispered softly, which, after long searches and failures, they finally opened a new dungeon. His eyes glowed with admiration, and his hands trembled slightly with waiting. Vanessa, noticing this, did not restrain from the comment, noting that he was really excited. Recognizing the importance of careful training, Bernard advised Rolf to increase the level of regeneration to be prepared for any surprise. Without hesitation, Rolf agreed, because he knew that every improved skill could be decisive in the future campaign. Meanwhile, Elsa stood near the tubs filled with magic crystals, and thoughtfully evaluated the efforts and resources that Bernard invested in their purchase. Realizing that these crystals can be key to their success, she decided not to waste time. After focusing, Elsa began to destroy crystals one by one, releasing their powerful magical energy. Each time, as Elsa destroyed the crystal, the waves of energy diverged around, illuminating the space with magical light. Ralph absorbed this energy, feeling his strength growing. Suddenly, the system reported that its regeneration skill has reached 10 levels, and a new skill was discovered: the choice of quantity. Noticing a sudden change in his behavior, he asked what had happened. Ralph explained that he now sees how the number of supersaturation appears above the crystals, opening up new horizons before him. Initially, the figure appeared above the crystal container, and then it rose to 2. Fascinated by this discovery, they suggested that Ralph try to absorb a few crystals at the same time to check the border of his new abilities. Ralph focused, and the crystals suddenly broke out of his place as if he had obeyed his will. All around were stunned by this sight. Elsa, without a moment, smashed all the crystals, releasing even more energy. Its strength has increased repeatedly, and he realized that he could now absorb several crystals at the same time due to his new ability. Bernard, watching this, realized that this discovery could radically change the situation. Studying data from the system, he noted that the limit was probably equal to the number 172, since the system did not exceed this number. The system asked Ralph whether he wanted to absorb 172 crystals, and realizing the importance of this step, he agreed. The crystals, as if conquering magical power, were lightly ripping from the barrel and rushed to Elsa, turning into a crazy vortex. Ralph immediately noticed the threat and shouted to warn it. Elsa, showing lightning reactions, immediately began to Suddenly, Ralph said in unbearable pain. His cry cut the silence of the forest, and his eyes expanded with horror and suffering. In the next moment he falls to the ground and all in a panic rush to him. Confused and excited, they try to help. Bernard, seeing the suffering Ralph, exclaimed to Vanessa, urging her to use healing magic. Vanessa immediately ran to Ralph, her hands began to emit light. Slowly, he said that the moment when he began to absorb crystals, he turned to him with unbearable pain, as if thousands of hot needles had pierced every cell of the body. Then the system reported that the crystal limit for absorption per day was exceeded. Immediately shared this information with others, and Bernard, embarrassed, frowned his eyebrows. NASA reported that magical crystals are a concentrate of pure magical energy, and if you absorb it too much at a time, it can cause serious consequences for the body. Ralph, supporting her opinion, nodded affirmatively, recognizing the truth of her words. She ran to Ralph and hugged him firmly, expressing her deep anxiety. Having confessed in her care, she poured her fears. Ralph also assured her that now everything is well, and there are no reasons for worries. One of them smiled with relief and suggested to calculate the rest of the crystals to determine how many more could be absorbed. Vanessa, having assumed the role of an accountant, carefully calculated the crystals and announced that 2,700 pieces remained. From the initial 3,000, Ralph only 300 was absorbed. The awareness of this truth has led him to understand that it takes 9 days to fully absorb the rest of the crystals. Bernard firmly stated that before going to the Ralph's dungeon, the level of skills should be increased, which will take time and effort. It seemed incredible to Ralph, his heart squeezed from the thought of lost time and opportunity. However, Bernard, as a true leader, reminded that the main task of the leader is to take care of the health and safety of his comrades. He proposed to use this time for intense training to prepare for future tests in the dungeon. Hard firmly and confidently announced that they will start intense workouts from the next day. His voice sounded decisively as a commander who gave orders to his soldiers before an important battle. Raoul, Finn, and Elsa, aware of the importance of the task, nodded confidently, supporting the plan. They realized that every minute of preparation could be crucial for their future adventure. She looked up to the sky and noticed how the sun slowly hid behind the horizon, painting clouds with golden-pink shades. Her face shone in the gentle light of the sunset. With a smile, she invited everyone to dinner. The proposal was accepted with joy and relief, because after a busy day, they needed time to restore and enjoy the moment of peace. The next morning, when the sun just began to illuminate the camp, Ralph felt cheerful and updated. His skill in regeneration has increased significantly, and he intended to experience his new opportunities. The morning training was under the close supervision of Bernard, and the first task was to determine the range of Ralph's ability. Several swords were dug into the ground at a certain distance from each other. Focusing, Ralph began to demonstrate his skill. The swords, as if obeying his will, began to fly into the air one by one. They determined that the radius of ability is approximately 10 steps. Ванесса, впевнено стоячи перед ними, запропонувала перейти до наступного етапу тренування. Behind the back of Vanessa stood a huge stone goal, with its formidable appearance, instilling both fear and respect. She offered to start a training session, and a little frightened Ralph with Elsa nodded, agreeing. The monster rushed after them, destroying everything in their path, and forced them to move at maximum speed and harmony. Протягом 10 хвилин вони ухилялися від ударів голема, намагаючись уникнути його нищівних атак. They looked at what was happening. Vanessa showed ruthlessness in her actions, but this contributed to the acquisition of combat experience. Ness heard it and denied it loudly, trying to hide her emotional reaction. Подяка була адресована Бернарду, адже саме він вчив Ральфа та Елсу мистецтву фехтування. They honed the punches, parrots and tactics necessary for successful combat. Елса ж почала тренування з луком, удосконалюючи майстерність стрільби та швидкість випуску стріл. Intensive training for several days, and constant use of magical energy, allowed Rolef to reach 23 regeneration levels. This step on the path of development has become a great example of its progress, bringing him a new skill, the synthesis of objects. NEA, having noticed the changes, raised her eyebrows in surprise, while Ralph, remembering her past adventures, reflected whether his new ability would be in combining several objects into one, creating more powerful artifacts. Завжди готовий до експериментів, запропонував випробувати нову здатність на мечах, які вони нещодавно придбали для тренувань. Ralph supported this with enthusiasm. Ельза взялася за завдання знищення мечів, готуючи їх до злиття, налаштовуючи свій кожен удар думкою. Ральф отримав повідомлення від системи, що один із залізних мечів зламався і його вже можна перетворити. He was looking forward to this process. Although it could not affect the quality of a new subject, Ralph decided to take a risk. After a few seconds, the synthesis ended, and a new iron sword appeared in his hands. The system reported that the force of the attack increased by 10 units, and the value of the sword jumped up to 5,000 gardens. Slowly lift the sword, feeling his strength. Металевий блиск, леза відбивав сонячні промені, які танцювали на його поверхні, ніби відзначаючи значущість цієї миті. He waved his sword, and every muscle in his body felt a new power. Bernard, who stood nearby, watched Ralph with delight and surprise. Він не міг повірити своїм очам. Меч, створений шляхом злиття, став значно міцнішим без участі коваля. This revealed new opportunities and prospects. Все ще приголомшений побаченим, Бернард запитав у Ральфа, чи можливо ще більше посилити меч. Ральф, усвідомлюючи важливість відкритих перспектив, пояснив, що кожне посилення має певну ймовірність успіху. However, if the two attempts are unsuccessful, the object may break. This news made Bernard even more respect Ralph's ability. Він задумливо дивився на меч і, зваживши ризики, визнав, що ніколи раніше не бачив предмета з підсиленням на +1. Навіть йому, досвідченому майстру, було очевидно, що меч став значно потужнішим. Бернард замислено додав, що таку зброю не варто виставляти на продаж у звичайних крамницях. With a serious facial expression, he explained that objects improved by magical merger can be suspected. Ralph nodded in understanding, realizing that their new skills and artifacts should be kept secret to avoid extra attention. У цю мить Ельза, глянувши на Бернарда, зауважила, що в нього надзвичайно цікавий погляд. Його очі мали незвичайний глибокий червоний відтінок, що ніби приховував якусь таємницю. She agreed that it was quite possible. The art attracted her attention, and she jokingly pointing to the painted eye, asked whether it was discussed, and then began to talk about its properties with enthusiasm. And Art, noticing that he was looking at him, explained that his unusual eye has a rare ability to distinguish. Thanks to him, he could determine the true value of things, distinguish fakes from treasures, and predict the trajectory of the enemy's blows. This made it invaluable in battle. Bernard was amazed when he heard it, because it was so entrenched in Bernard's nickname Red View among his comrades. Noticing Ralph's surprise, Bernard noted that he also begins to show more and more unexpected abilities. Alpha agreed. But with some sadness he noted that his skills, although impressive, are not always useful in battle. He hoped that Elsa would always be near, because her support for him was invaluable. With a smile on his face, he thanked her look. I have, with her inherent in her voting and sincerity, noted that it was probably fate. Suddenly the look focused on Ralphie. His eyes shook. She carefully suggested that he think about the consequences if Elsa went, hinting that he would become helpless without her. Ralph was confused by this thought, felt his words struck by his ego and confidence. At that moment, Elsa could not contain his emotions. Her voice trembled from indignation when she strongly stated that she would never leave Ralph. Nisa, seeing their reaction, smiled and added with warmth in the voice that understands it. And they will always be together. Suddenly, Vanessa's facial expression became serious, and returning to Ralph, she noted that groups like theirs rarely persist for a long time. She warned that one day they could disperse. Ralph took it to the heart, realizing that life is full of surprises, and even the strongest connections can break. These thoughts fell into his soul, and he thought about the future. However, despite the seriousness of the moment, Vanessa quickly switched attention to urgent issues. She proposed to prepare for the next stage of the exercise. Suddenly, as if by a magic wand, behind her back there were impressive groups of huge gollets. Their stone bodies were majestic in the sky, creating a spooky look. Vanessa ordered everyone to be prepared for training. They were struck by an incredible number of gollets. The unexpected appearance of such numerous enemies forced to respond quickly. Driving away from the attacks, they ran, and the gollets ruthlessly destroyed everything in front of them. It was not just a workout. When dust was settled and workout, they were exhausted, but determined. They returned to the camp. Now they have again plunged into the creation of new items, trying to improve their weapons. When the work was completed, Bernard approached the result of their efforts. He was amazed at the quality of new swords. Their shine and energetic aura testified to the great power they were filled. Bernard noted that he had never seen so many legendary items in one place. Full of pride for his achievements, he explained that he had improved all objects through fusion regeneration. However, he admitted that some of them broke during this process. It was an inevitable risk. The days of continuous work and training justified themselves. Ralph absorbed all the crystals, and the level of its regeneration reached the mark 25. With each new level, his passive skills increased, and the system awarded it with stars that symbolized the rarity and strength of abilities. More stars meant higher efficiency. It was an incredible achievement that opened up new power and capabilities. In the beginning, holding a sword in his hands, he was amazed at the realization that a real legendary weapon was in front of him. His thoughts drove to the blacksmiths, who spent decades to create such masterpieces, while Ralph managed to make it in minutes. He realized that the mass sale of such swords can overwhelm the market by reducing the price. So he first approached the massive stone column and tied it firmly with a reliable rope. Turning to the team, he explained that everyone should tie themselves with a rope. It was like a reservation in case someone gets lost or gets into trouble in the flooded part of the dungeon. The rope will become their thread Ariadne, which will help return to the starting point even in the dark and waters. Understanding the course of Bernard's thoughts, the NASA representative explained that the excess goods on the market can reduce their value. Having considered this, Bernard proposed to sell swords in armed shops, where there is always high demand, so there will be no difficulty with implementation. Recognizing that they were awaited by an unknown dungeon, full traps and dangerous monsters, Bernard ordered everyone to arm himself. He recalled that the test hangs, and they know very little about it, so you should be prepared for anything. In the end, the whole team was armed for teeth and was ready for a future adventure. Ralph, having corrected his armor, approached Elsa and asked if she was ready. Elsa, dressed in her fighting armor, looked focused and confident. Her eyes shone with a mixture of determination and despair. Despite the slightly open breastplate, it seemed unbreakable. Ralph, with a touch of concern in her voice, asked if her armor was too open, but she just looked at him in surprise without understanding his anxiety. At the moment Vanessa approached them, she smiled, and with enthusiasm said that everyone looks great, ready for any trials that would wait for them in front. Bernard, checking his weapon, looked at everyone and asked if they were ready. Ralph was overwhelmed by a wave of anger. Together, they went to the entrance to the dungeon. Each step was echoed in the silence of the forest, and although everyone was confident, light excitement did not leave them. Going down the steps, they exchanged the last tips, calling each other for special care. Watching their focused faces, there was a strong unity and belief in success that overwhelmed each of them. However, no one realized that it was at this moment. In the dark, hidden from a look, the figures were closely monitored for every movement. In the hands of these mysterious observers, daggers flickered, just waiting for the moments to grasp the shelter and impress with suddenly, carefully descended on the suspended stairs inside the dungeon. Each step called the creaking under his feet, and the light from Bernard's torch was shimmering below, throwing long shadows on the walls. The air became more colder and moist as in the end, Elsa reached the bottom, touching the legs of the cold, solid floor of the dungeon. Standing on the bottom, she looked at Ralph and anxiously asked him to be careful. Ralph last came down, confidently, but carefully. Bernard, holding a torch to illuminate the dark angles, suggested that the study began, and the group went to the endless maze of the dungeon. Move forward, watching and catching each rustle. Shadows from the flickering torch danced on the walls, turning ancient symbols and runes into living things. The smell of moisture and ancient stone filled the air with mysteriousness and danger. Ralph, they began to approach the planned place. Their steps suddenly subsided, absorbed by the noise of water. The flooded passage opened in front of them. Water, dark and opaque, blocked the way. It seemed to be wrapped in a glass shell. Having carefully studied the flooded passage in front of him, he took a deep breath and stated that they should overcome the dungeon sucked up by water to continue their journey. His voice sounded confidently and decisively, despite the fact that the obstacle seemed insurmountable. Bernard looked carefully at Vanessa, whistling, and asked her to use a spell for breathing underwater. Vanessa, nodded, lifted her sophisticated rod and, closing her eyes, focused on the swing. She began to speak the magical words calmly and measuredly, and soon the rod shone with a soft but dazzling light. At the same moment, the whole detachment felt their bodies surrounded by charming energy, giving unusual abilities. The feelings were strange, almost magical, as if they became part of another reality. When the light was scattered, Vanessa opened her eyes and smiled. She explained that now each of them can breathe underwater. Without spending time, the group plunged into the cool waters of the underground lake. Elsa was delighted. She was breathing underwater as if it were as natural as on the surface. She enjoyed this new feeling, admiring Vanessa's charming abilities. The group was carefully moving forward through a narrow passage, where the water gently hugged their bodies, giving a feeling of security. Although the path seemed endless, they did not stop. Бачаючи все навколо, Бернард помітив малий проріз у кам'яній стіні і подав знак іншим, щоб вони обережно поплили до нього. Coming out of the water, travelers came across huge ancient doors. Bernard looked at them carefully and was surprised to find that the door lock was not visible. He immediately suspected the trap and urged everyone to be careful. To all who always trusted Bernard's intuition, he quietly turned to Elsa, reminding that his father always warned against such situations. Nessa looked at Ralph with anxiety, asking him not to forget to check the rope, which was their only way back. Ralph nodded in response and went to the rope. However, as soon as he was about to fix the rope on a strong stone, his gaze attracted something strange. The same rope they trusted so much in the lake waters, as if they were accidentally left or forgotten. Seeing his confusion, he shook his head and asked what had happened. Ralph pulled out a rope from the lake and could not believe his eyes. She was broken. Travelers found that the rope left as a landmark was broken. Panic and confusion engulfed them. Особливо засмученим був Ральф, адже він особисто прив'язував мотузку і був переконаний, що вона не підведе. At that moment Vanessa approached Ralph. Спокійно, але впевнено вона запропонувала уважніше придивитися до обрізку мотузки. Standing next to Rolf, she pointed to clear traces of the cut on the rope. She was not torn. She was carefully cut. She thought, perhaps that's where they buried the courtyard. Ralph, thinking, this news has caused a new wave of anxiety among friends. No one could understand who did and for what purpose. Проте в Наса, завжди уважних до деталей та обізнаних в таємницях підземель, виникло передчуття. She explained that if the rope was cut, it indicates the presence of other adventurers in the dungeon. Perhaps unknown are trying to confuse them or interfere with their advance. The backdrop, always collected and ready for any surprises, guessed that someone specifically cut the ropes to get lost in the maze. Despite the circumstances, Bernard realized that there was no point in returning. Він запропонував просуватися далі, оскільки ще не виявили інших проходів, тому не могли заплутатися. Having examined the huge door for traps and found nothing suspicious, Bernard warned everyone about the possible monsters who can chat behind them. Everyone was prepared for possible dangers, armed and alert. Bernard gently put his hand on the massive door and slowly began to open them. Скрип важких завіс прокотився темними коридорами підземелля, поглинаючи увагу мандрівників. Нарешті, коли двері відчинились, перед ними постала велична кам'яна статуя, що займала центр просторої кімнати. Цей витвір мистецтва випромінював древню силу, вражаючи досконалою деталізацією. The statue depicted a mysterious god or a warrior. Гадаючи над цим, Харт зафіксував у щоденнику, що, можливо, йому таки сподобається. Маленьке вовчення Ельзи миттєво кинулося до статуї і почало люто гарчати, неначе це була жива істота, що несе загрозу. Elsa, surprised and concerned about his behavior, felt. Elsa pressed Rice to herself, trying to reassure him. However, Vovchenya did not stop growling without casting a look from a stone statue. Bernard, carefully inspecting the statue and the space around, suggested that a trap could be installed nearby. Returning to Elsa, who reassured the restless Rice, asked if the wolf statue was annoyed. Elsa, trying to comfort her pet, replied that Risi did not like a stone giant. Nisa thought, reflecting on the possible causes of such a reaction of wolf. Suddenly, the Reese jumped out of Elsa's arms and rushed forward. The wolf-stroke rushed to leaving the room as if something pushed him. Elsa, without thinking, rushed after her pet. Rolf tried to stop it but, understanding the futility of attempts, rushed. She was rushing forward without taking her look away from the wolf until others hurried to her, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, she stopped at one of the exits leading into the darkness. Rolf came closer. Both lions looked at the other passage, and Elsa had a feeling that Rice, seeking to go there. Bernard noted that the strip of turbid water extended. Looking at the situation, he reassured that thanks to their ability to breathe underwater, the team would be able to go through this way. Nessa, without waste, suggested using other magic. She raised her rod and put a spell on everyone, allowing you to walk on the water. As if by a magic wand, the group could now move the surface of the water. Carefully stepping on the surface of the water, feeling something unusual, they moved forward along the dark corridor. The light was looming at the end, giving them hope. Travelers came out of the dark corridor, and before their eyes a picture opened, which none of them could imagine. They were right on the shore of Lake Van. The majestic water surface stretched in front of them, glittering in the sun, as if a huge sapphire. Wolf, feeling free, rushed to the water joyfully, leaving her small traces on the soft sand of the shore. Breathing and looking back, they were shocked. Lake Van, holy and legendary place, stretched right in front of them. This meant that the city of Agdorvan, which they heard so much, should be somewhere nearby. It was difficult for them to believe in such good fortune. They stood stunned, unbridled by what they saw. However, attentive Levanese details noted that it may not be a way out of the dungeon, but the entrance. Her words were alarming everyone. Soon, they saw an ancient tombstone nearby, covered with moss and traces of time. Vanessa came closer and carefully touched the ancient stone, noticing that the inscriptions were made in divine. She suggested that this tombstone may be relevant to Mr. Dwyrus. As it turned out, Asif Dwyrus was the same god who created the world. Ralph confirmed her assumption, adding that there is another god, a great beast near the Dwyrus. It is the Dwyrus that blesses people. Vanessa, looking at Bernard, asked him to read the inscription on the tombstone, hoping that his knowledge would help to solve the riddle. Bernard, although confessed that he did not understand the divine language very well, He nevertheless approached and tried to explain ancient symbols. He was able to read only part of the inscription that told about a friend who created the world together with someone. Other words were too damaged to understand them. After reading the text, Ralph suggested that it may be a grave of a friend who helped God. Bernard, looking carefully at the inscription, skeptically shook his head. In his opinion, it was unlikely that God could have a friend in the usual sense of the word. He suggested that the memorial could be dedicated to both gods, but the meaning of the word friend remained unclear. Only Elsa, blinking her eyes and thoughtfully turning to others, asked if they remembered a statue room. Her voice was amazed. She remembered that there was a statue, which from her point of view, represented the virus. Divine thought moved it to the way where the two gods could be together, but over time, all the traces were lost in nothing. These reflections were suddenly interrupted by Rice, who ran and loudly rapped, attracting their attention. Wolf watched with excitement, and Elsa thought what could associate Rice with the statue of the girl they saw, and he, feeling pride, was slightly frozen and confessed that he did not know the answer. But he remembered that they were good that they learned about the trap and the secret entrance. Perhaps it was indeed a secret burial place. Travelers agreed that their find was a real happy case. Now that Risi calmed down, they could continue the study, carefully past the dark corridors, listening to the echo of their own steps. Bernard, carefully following every little thing, carefully recorded everything they met on their way. The corridors seemed endless, and each of them was full of riddles. They examined each corner and turn so as not to miss any important detail. After a few grueling hours of search, they agreed to leave the dungeons in turn, and Ralph came out last. Hart looked at his records with relief. Fortunately, no monsters have happened, and the dungeon card is almost complete. They accurately knew the path from the forest clip to the entrance near Lake Van. At the end of the records, he suggested that the group complete the work today and continue the next day. Everyone agreed, decided to accumulate forces for new discoveries, but as soon as they began to disperse, someone suddenly exclaimed to Ralph. Turning, Ralph saw a group of Figaro, Gatto, Arya, and several guards. No one expected that he would face aggressors from the Golden Lion Guild, who gained dubious glory due to their arrogance and superiority. We, frowned, came closer, and asked what brought them here. Figaro, mockingly smiling, replied that they came to explore the dungeon. These words caused anxiety. Monroe with pleasure added that they decided to take up the case, because they believed that the Bernard group was not capable of any action. In his voice there was a clear indication that their presence here is undesirable, and that they should go. Figaro, however, ordered his satellites to move forward, despite the possible dangers. He was extremely resourceful. Keeping calm, he loudly warned Figaro about numerous narrow aisles and flooded territories inside the village dungeon, where it is easy to get lost. Figure mocked that they did not need any help and cope on their own. Hearing Bernard's reservation, the converting was surprised. It was unclear why their leader refused help, given how dangerous the dungeon could be. Nevertheless, he proudly stated that they were proud golden lions and did not need help from such a weak group. Their words caused quiet whispers among the guards. Some of them began to question the Figaro's decision. Suddenly, one of the guards whispered quietly to his friend who cut the rope of Bernard. But, contrary to this, the group was able to return. His friend, frightened by the possible consequences, strongly asked him not to say it aloud. Suddenly, a dissatisfied whisper spread throughout Bernard's company, making everyone alert. Angered, he turned to Figaro. His eyes shone from indignation. With a shaky anger, he asked Figaro whether it was true. As if not noticing his mood, he just smiled, surprising, and with inconspicuous innocence asked what was being talked about. Hardly holding back from the outbreak of anger, Figaro was on the verge of an explosion. But Bernard, always calm and prudent, intervened. He noted that it may be a matter for someone else's hands, because in the world is full of meaningless adventurers capable of such pranks. Hearing Bernard's words, the hero again pretended to understand, and smiled kindly. However, in his eyes, a spark of distrust was. The cheeky Figaro, greatly looking, ordered his subordinates to prepare for the study of the dungeons and go forward. His confidence and indifference to danger caused anxiety, but he understood that Figaro was impossible to convince Figaro. Nasa, noticing Arya's in the cap, did not refrain from smiling and reminded it loudly that Arya had not yet completed her task. Arya, silently stretching the cap even deeper into her eyes, began to descend into sideways, expressing his disappointment because of the stubbornness of the golden lion. Despite this, Bernard suggested G forget about what happened. He suggested focusing on dinner, claiming that there were no monsters in the dungeons, and this is great, because there is no danger. They were supported, and everyone went to the carriage to relax and eat. The late afternoon, Elsa enjoyed a relaxing bath, plunging into warm water, which relieved fatigue and tension. Her peace broke the strange sound, and she was alert, turning to understand what was happening. She was horrified by her hand touched the window. Elsa burst, and her heart was worn by fear. Everyone who was sitting in the living room immediately jumped on their feet, hearing her cry. Elsa, wrapped in a towel, ran out to them. Her face was full of horror. No one understood what happened, but everyone was in danger. Realizing that the case is serious, everyone immediately rushed to her in the bathroom. She led them to the window and stated in a trembling voice that there was a man outside. Everyone saw fingerprints on the glass, which caused them anxiety. Ralph and Bernard immediately ran out, looking for a stranger. Ralph noticed a shadow in the valley and shouted Bernard that that man was already here. They rushed to a meeting. Their hearts were killed by adrenaline. Approaching, they saw the wounded sitting on the ground, flowing through blood. Carefully examining the wounded, he realized that one of the members of the Golden Lions was in front of him. The man's face was pale, and his clothes were leaked through blood, leaving bloody spots on the ground. Ralph wondered why he was, and where the rest of their group. Fighting his head, he begged for help in a weak voice. Despair and pain flashed in his eyes. The trembling hand, pointing to the dungeon, began a story about what happened. He said that their group went down to the dungeon, hoping for a quick and successful expedition. But, barely managed to enter the dark corridors, they encountered a huge monster that seemed from nowhere. A detachment of golden lions with enthusiasm and self-confidence descended into the dungeon, not having an idea of what awaits ahead. The figure previously seen by Bernard and his satellites suddenly came to life. The stone eyes of the mountain, as if real, came on them. As it began to move, the golden lions, covered with panic, rushed to flee from the stone machine, desperately trying to catch up. Their snakes immediately began to erupt the flames, and the fiery tongues unfolded in narrow corridors, burning everything in their path. The hero was stunned by chaos that raged around. Arya, leaning to Gatto, said quietly that it was time to go, and they, not wanting to risk life for the sake of crazy adventure, began to flee. Figaro, noticing their escape, shouted, not understanding where they were going. Looking back over her shoulder, she shouted that this nightmare was his own fault. Gatto, continuing to flee, thanked him for a generous fee, but stated that he was not going to risk his life for him. The warrior added that they would break the deal, and the O figure in fury threatened with revenge. He wished him success with a sarcastic smile, realizing that the chances of success in the figures were small. The monster, terrifying from the rage, rapidly ran to Godot. His huge paws with a powerful blow struck the wall, breaking the stones into the priests and forcing it to fall. Never use the thunder of heaven against Gatto. It can knock it off and cause falling. Arya, which ran in front, suddenly felt a light shock. She stopped and turned, hearing the screams of Gatto. For a moment her eyes flashed, but she quickly mastered herself and took advantage of magic, creating an icy wall to protect her friend from monster attacks. However, the icy curtain was incapable of delaying the monster. The monster, with a frantic fury, broke through the veil and immediately rushed to the Arya, hitting it with such force that it fainted and fell on the ground. Her body lay still, and it seemed that she was no longer breathing. Soon the monster, full of fury, directed his gaze to Figaro and pressed him to the ground with a powerful paw. Figaro, covered with horror, felt as if life was leaking from his body. Like a ghost, Ralph immediately jumped to Ugert. With incredible strength and determination, he plunged his sword in Lap Monzamisk. Retreating with a formidable roar, Figaro made a monster sigh on full breasts. Figaro was amazed that Ralph had come to his aid, despite all their previous disputes. Bernard and the rest of his group rushed to the rescue. Concerned, he reported that one of the people Figaro told them about everything that happened in the dungeon. She, with unwavering determination, stated that they are ready to save Figaro, but it would require a significant remuneration. Their words sounded full of firm determination. After evaluating the situation, Figaro ordered to hide in a safe place, so as not to interfere with the battle. Filled with determination and anger, he shouted that he would not retreat, as Vanessa and Elsa could suffer from it. The monster was approaching again. The stone snake threw fire and poisonous fog, filling the dungeons with suffocating gas. They quickly realized that they needed to protect themselves from the poisonous fog, and suggested using magic to create a water shell. Nessa agreed and began to concentrate, causing overflowing water protection. Aware of the seriousness of the situation, Enerd exclaimed that he would distract the monster while Vanessa and Elsa would attack him. And Ralph, meanwhile, will take care of the group's protection. Bernard rushed forward, provoking a monster to follow him. All this was arranged, and they began to act without delay. Meanwhile, Ralph watched Bernard's skill and was amazed at his skills. Bernard moved lightly at incredible speed and agility, evading the attacks of the monster. He made fast and accurate blows, but even Bernard realized that he was barely catching up with the powerful monster attacks. Bernard, looking at the situation, realized that the monster clearly did not use all his power. His blows were accurate but not fatal, as if the creature enjoyed their fear and weakness. It was not just a battle, but a cruel game in which the monster... Seeing the state of Bernard, Nessa realized that it was necessary to act immediately. Having concentrated all its magical power, it caused a powerful ice wall that grew between monster and Bernard. Unexpectedly for himself, the monster crashed into it. Vanessa met, realizing that it was necessary to act quickly and decisively. Bernard, noticing their hesitation, assured that it was a brilliant idea. The next moment, the monster rapped with new force. It turned out that he was able to destroy icy barriers with the help of his fiery breathing, and was now completely free. In the end, aware of the growing danger, he shouted that he would become a bait and ordered Ralph to distract the monster from others. Ralph, squeezing his sword firmly, said with confidence that Bernard could rely on him. Hearing these words, Bernard Wounds, holding the sword firmly, boldly stood before the monster. He saw his huge shadow, but could not understand what a creature. However, he knew for sure. Now it's not time for fear. Before him was an adventure seeker with a legendary sword, who was passed on to their family from generation to generation. Ready for the battle, when the monster struck his paw, Ralph managed to put a shield. The power of the impact was incredible, and he realized that if it were not for the legendary shield in his hands, he could not survive. The next moment, the monster turned out the flames directly to Ralph. Feeling the heat, he first frozen in fear and fell, but managed to rise despite the burning tongues of fire. This did not stop the monster. The next moment the sword was above them, and his huge wing cut the air. In the depths of the monster's trap, something sinister shook, showing a hidden danger. In the hidden trap of the monster seemed light. The art, full of anxiety, shouted Ralph to retreat, because something terrible would approach. Scary images were raging in the head. He imagined how they and Elsa would fall into slavery, performing the freedom of ruthless masters who would... Bernard, noticing Ralphic and Rarity, realized that the monster was preparing for the next attack. It was at this point that the frightened and excited Elsa shouted Ralph, warning about the danger, but it was too late. The monster, giving out an ominous reconstrium, began to erupt the huge tongues of the flames directly on Ralph. The flames rushed at such speed and force that seemed to absorb everything in its path. Keeping cold-blooded, Ralph exposed a shield, hoping that he would be able to protect him from fiery rage. The shield became his last stronghold. The fire was too strong. The shield began to smoke, and Ralph's hands burned from the heat. The pain was unbearable, but he just clenched his teeth and continued to hold the shield firmly, protecting his friends. Seeing that Ralph could not stand for a long time, she screamed, which would not allow the monster to win. Quickly pulling the bowstrings of her bow, she aimed at arrows in the monster. A moment, and 2 arrows with a whistle cut the air, hitting the monster. He released a piercing roar, and his huge body shuddered with pain. The boss, putting all her force in the blow, bounced back and fell to the ground. The blind and angry monster began to escape. In rage, he rushed around, sniffing everything in his way with flame breathing. Overcoming the pain, he rushed to Elsa to make sure that everything was fine with her. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled with tension, but she nodded silently, demonstrating her readiness to continue the fight. Overlooking the monster with his eyes, he gave the situation lightly and ordered everyone to direct the attacks on his wings. "Vanessa, support us." According to the plan, he shouted Elga that she was doing well, encouraging her. The next moment, Vanessa used the spell Wind Blade, and many magical blades that glittered in the dusk of the dungeon were rushed directly to the monster. The magical blades pierced the wings of the monster, leaving the torn holes. Deprived of the ability to fly, the monster began to fall. Approaching the ground, the monster opened his huge mouth, ready to strike a new blow. Watching him, he realized that the monster would probably spit out a new flame soon, but he was aware that it was impossible to retreat. Meanwhile, Elsa, who was standing nearby, urged him to escape. The determination flashed in his eyes when he exclaimed that he would not do so. He was also amazed at his courage, and the next moment Ralph, without spending a second, rushed directly at the monster. Ralph, with incredible speed and determination, rushed forward, directing his sword like a spear directly into the monster's mouth. His legs barely touched the earth, and the air seemed to push him to the goal. The next moment, Ralph, with grace and force, directs his sword directly into the monster's mouth, penetrating his body to the depth. The sharp blade punched the flesh and bones, leaving no chance of a monster. Slightly creaking, he opened the lid and froze from surprise. The monster issued the last piercing roar that echoed all over the dungeon, and the powerless fell to the ground. His enormous body rolled up, lifting a cloud of dust and scattering small stones. Standing next to the defeated enemy, he breathed hard, realizing that he had made the impossible. Adrenaline left his body, leaving only fatigue and exhaustion. Returning, he wanted to make sure that everything went to the plan, but there was no time left. Elsa, overflowing with joy and relief in her eyes, rushed to him, hugged firmly and exclaimed that he was not just a good guy, but a real hero who performs his job perfectly. All, including Bernard, Vanessa, and a group of golden lions, were stunned. They could not believe their eyes, watching Ralph overcome such a powerful monster. Without words, his feat was noted. Suddenly their victory was interrupted by an unexpected movement. The body of the monster began to move and the eyes opened again. Like a phoenix that was born of ashes, the monster reappeared before them, as if nothing had happened. His determination and fiery remained adamant, and he rushed straight at them again. Realizing that the monster was still living, he felt a cold sweat run on his back. Again, an enemy, which could not be destroyed, came to him. The monster made sinister sounds, and his wounds began to heal. With new power, the monster was overwhelmed, filling the dungeons with a gully and echo, which forced the walls to tremble and crumble with small stones. Wilson and Ralph, covered with horror and surprise, realized that, despite all their attempts, the monster is not going to retreat. Vanessa, squeezing the staff before whitewashing, noted with a gloomy look the incredible perseverance of the monster. His power and endurance resembled something supernatural. Bernard, realizing the seriousness of the situation and the futility of their attacks, immediately ordered everyone to retreat, hoping that the regroup would give a chance to survive and develop a new action plan. Her gaze glowing with anger when she screamed that she hated the most of such stubborn monsters. Having waved the rod, she created a zonal pressure spell, directing her magical energy into the air. The giant magical shield originated over the monster, suppressing it to the earth with incredible force, as if the invisible hand of a vest. Watching the successful effect of spell, praised Vanessa, noting that the monster will not move now. Joy was not long. The monster, roaring as an angry god, repelled the attack of Vanessa, piercing the magic barrier and scattering the fragments of charming energy throughout the dungeon. The monster again rushed into the attack. His ominous eyes were burning rage and hatred. However, Vanessa remained calm and warned everyone to be careful. Her voice was heard in the intense silence. Having waved the staff, she again created a shield that struck the monster with a huge head with all power. The echo of the echo flew in the air, filling everything around. Seeing that the situation is becoming critical and less time remains less, he ran to Elsa, asking with excitement in his voice whether everything is fine with her. Elsa nodded, trying to look confident, but her eyes gave fear and anxiety. At that moment, Ralph noticed a bloody spot on earth, and his heart squeezed with horror. Bernard flowed blood. His wounds seemed serious and dangerous. Land, holding him, worriedly asked why he rushed to protect her. Tears shone in her eyes. Fighting his breath, he looked at Ralph. His eyes were overflowing with pain and determination. She whispered, barely audible. He said that Ralph should now take on the lead in their group, taking this heavy burden. He ordered to get everyone out of the dungeon immediately, because he realized that their chances of survival were rapidly decreasing. Watching the monster approaching, Bernard noted that in their present state, they are unlikely to be able to cope with this threat. He was barely audible that if they stay, they will die together. His voice was interrupted by a cough, and the body was shaking in pain. With a desperate look in his eyes, Luke turned to Vanessa, reminding her of her ability to treat, hoping that she would be able to save Bernard. Ralph was ordered to leave because the situation became critical. Vanessa, addressing Bernardo with hope in her eyes, reported that it would take a little time to perform the healing spell. On the screen, a scene appeared on the screen, where the main character insisted that she stopped. But Vanessa asked him to trust her soothingly. She pointed to Ralph and noticed his unwavering determination. Despite fear and pain, his face was concentrated and radiating confidence. After a moment of thought, he finally realized that in Ralph he saw a real adventurer capable of leading them to victory and survival. Ralph's sister continued the rings, making stunning sounds that were spreading the dungeons. Ralph stood motionlessly in front of her, focused and decisive. The monster's eyes were burning fury, preparing for a new attack. Then, realizing that the moment came, Ralph ordered Elga loudly. His voice was given confidence, giving her strength. Without delay, Elsa stretched her bow. Her movements were fast and accurate, and the focus was clearly read in her eyes, in which her determination flashed. Squeezing his teeth, he rushed to the monster. His sword shone in the dim light of the dungeon. With incredible speed and force he struck, cutting off one of the monster's paws. The thick black blood began to flow from the cut-off, filling the stone slabs under her feet. However, the next moment paw began to recover, and Ralph, fascinated by what he saw, could not believe his eyes. The wound was healed before him, and the limb returned to its place. Standing nearby, she stared at the monster, looking for his most vulnerable place. The bow was stretched to the edge, and its muscles strained from effort. To feel the tension of the bow that penetrated into the whole body, it was preparing to release a deadly arrow. The monster noticed her actions and began to move. But Ralph Curler, monster, tormented pain, the monster began to rush. His movements were becoming more disorderly. In a gust of rage, he rushed directly to Elsa. Seeing the threat, Ralph raised the shield, and the monster crashed into him with a deafening roar. The blow was so strong that cracks began to appear on the shield. Ralph realized that the shield could not withstand, but remained unbreakable, protecting Elsa. The situation seemed critical. She ordered Ralph to hold on and stepped forward. Ralph could not understand what she had planned, and his heart was squeezed from anxiety. In a desperate attempt to correct the situation, Thor threw gloves, her voice, full of determination, loudly heard in the dungeon. She exclaimed that she would destroy the barrier that defended the monster with the help of her skills. He stood confused, not having an idea of her next step, but trust in her strength prevented him from expressing any objections. Gathering all her magical power, she raised her hands. Her eyes shone with anger and determination. She put her hands straight on the creature, and a powerful energy escaped from her palms, penetrating his body. He begins to crumble. His massive body cracks and breaks down under the influence of her strength. Standing in front of the monster, he happily shouted, feeling relief because they managed to win. His face glowed with a triumph, and it seemed that the battle was completed. But Elsa, breathing hard, suddenly and sharply, she approached the monster. Her steps remained confident, though it seemed exhausted. She reached out to the monster's mouth. Her fingers glowed with magical energy. After focusing, she directed all her power to the point of touch, trying to destroy the internal structure of the monster. Seeing her effort, someone exclaimed that they succeeded, hoping that it was a final victory. They kept breathing. Watching the monster began to crumble. His huge body cracks, gradually dissolving in the air, as if it disappeared without a trace. The hunt was taken to the side. They rolled on the stone floor of the dungeon. Elsa, exhausted after tension, tried to restore her breathing. Her hands trembled from fatigue. The moment of happiness was replaced by horror. All parts of the monster began to gather, as if the invisible force of the puzzle behind the puzzle restored it. At incredible speed, he regenerated, despite their attacks, which seemed in vain. Elzena's skill was not so effective. But Ralph noticed something strange. A strange glow emitted from the head of the monster. Realizing that there was a magical jewel inside the skull, which gave the monster the ability to recover, Ralph felt a new hope in it. This discovery gave him impetus for a bold action plan. Memories of his father, his courage and unwavering, were flashed into Ralph's head. The image of the father standing on the battlefield inspired him, giving strength and determination. At that moment, Ralph's determination hardened, and he lifted his sword. His eyes were burning in rage. Ralph rushed forward, at incredible speed, approaching the monster. His steps were rapid and accurate. He jumped, aiming his sword directly on the head of the monster, trying to hit the point where the magic stone was hidden. The sword blade pierced the flesh of the monster, penetrating deep inside the skull. Suddenly, a systematic message appeared before Ralph's eyes, as if from the sky. The system asked if he wanted to improve his blade. The surprised Ralph could not understand where the proposal came from and why right now. But not having time for reflection, he agreed, and the process of updating the weapon immediately began. His hands shone with bright light, changing the shape and structure of the sword. The magical energy enveloped the blade, and Ralph felt the power fills his weapon. In a few seconds, a new spell was applied to the weapon cloth. Anna ran to Ralph glowing with joy and facial relief. She hugged him firmly, with her own hands trembling from adrenaline and emotions. Ralph, still embarrassed, could not understand why she was so happy, and asked what to do with the monster, preparing for action. Still smiling, she exclaimed that the monster had disappeared, and Ralph had overcome him. He stood, not believing in what he heard. His heart knocked crazy, realizing that the battle had ended. At this point, Bernard ran to them, whose face glowed with pride and admiration. With respect in his voice, he noted Ralph's courage and determination. He, nodding silently, was crowded with feelings. Feeling himself a hero, he could not grasp the grandeur of his act. Kumpani, gathering in the corner, looked at him with surprise and admiration. They could not believe that Ralph, who was considered a simple garbage, managed to defeat this terrible monster. Their views glowed with admiration and respect. Seeing their embarrassment, the girl decisively ordered everyone to silence. Then, without losing confidence, she stated that everyone was returning to the estate. The subordinates began to depart, still impressed by the events. Their steps of the moon flew down the dungeons. Ralph and his group remained enjoying the victory. Vanessa, sighing with relief, looked around, tired and pleasure mixed on her tired face. At this point, everyone directed his views on Rice, who noticed something on the ground. Elsa, paying attention to the strange behavior of the wolf, faded with surprise, trying to see what he found. Going closer, she saw that it was the same stone that Ralph destroyed with her sword. The stone dimly twinkled with sinister light, leaving traces of magical energy. Rice, not knowing the danger, grabbed the stone with sharp teeth. His eyes glowed away. After hurrying to Rice, he grabbed him for a shot and desperately pleaded to spit the stone. He shouted that it could not be eaten, otherwise Rice could turn into a monster. His heart was crazy, and thoughts were chaotically looking for a way out of the situation. He urged the wolf persistently to spit out that stone. Panic and pleading sounded in his voice. Despite all Ralph's efforts, Reza cheated and swallowed a stone. Everyone present in place was frozen as if petrified, reflecting horror and shock on their faces. No one had the slightest idea of how to proceed. The next moment from his mouth, Risi escaped steam. His eyes shook a strange, almost supernatural glow for a moment. Elsa, holding her breath, followed it. A mixture of fear and curiosity appeared on her face. With trembling hands, he released the wolf and stepped back without losing his eyes. All the views were addressed to Rice, not knowing what to expect. However, instead of turning into a monster, Rice just smiled. His tail waved happily, as if nothing had happened. It seemed that the stone had no influence on him. One day, when the sun was hiding behind the horizon, pouring the edge of the forest with soft light, Elsa decided to test her ability to destroy. She aimed at Vanessa's dress that was standing nearby. A moment, and the fabric began to crumble on powder. At the same time, Ralph quickly applied his ability to recover. The charming energy enveloped Vanessa, and in a moment, a new, gorgeous dress appeared on it. The fabric sparkled, playing colors in the ray of sunset. Vanessa did not restrain his joy, laughing at happiness. She immediately rushed to Bernard to shook her outfit. He carefully studied ancient characters, gently holding his fingers on the carved signs. Namu quietly noted that these signs resemble an ancient divine language, but he could not fully unravel them. However, he managed to decipher the phrase about the ray of light in the impermeable darkness, and he suggested that this sword was able to significantly strengthen his ruler. Ralph wondered, his gaze became more focused, immersed in art, focusing on the runes on the wolf's swords. He quietly claimed that it was an undoubtedly divine language. His gaze glowed with delight and curiosity, as if he touched the mysteries of antiquity. He suggested that these runes could be associated with the goddess, confident and solemn. Then his gaze moved to Elsa, who at this time carefully laid a piece of meat before Rissy, preparing for dinner. Rissy saw a piece of meat in front of him, breathed deeply, and exhaled the flames sharply. Its new ability to control the fire with impressive accuracy, turning the meat into a mouth-watering juicy dish. Elsa, noting the incredible abilities of her wolf, said with surprise that it seems that their rise is turning into a real monster. In her voice felt awe, where both anxiety and admiration were mixed. Ralph, watching the events, nodded in the sign of consent, and at the same time noted, despite his new talent, Rissy remained the same sweet wolf who they loved. Vanessa, smiling slightly, turned to Bernard. It seems to be Rise. Bernard, immersed in his thoughts, frowned a little. He warned, although this may be the case, one should not forget about its demonic nature and the high probability of transformat. With passion in her voice, she exclaimed that Rice remained the same. His heart and soul remained unchanged. She tightly wrapped the wolf, feeling the kind wool and the warmth of his body. Ralph cheered to her that it was still their gentle Rice, whom they know and love. The baby, feeling the care and love of friends, began to lick himself. His eyes glowed with friendliness and dedication. Bernard, watching this touching scene, smiled. He realized that despite all the changes and new abilities, Rice remained the same ordinary wolves. His words reassured everyone, and a warm and friendly atmosphere reigned again in the camp. The next day, when the sun just appeared above the horizon, the Bernard group went to the Adventurers Guild. As soon as they entered a majestic building with high wooden ceilings and walls, decorated with trophies and flags, all present in the hall turned on them. In their views, surprise and reverence were raging, and whispers were flying throughout the hall. Ralph and Bernard were stunned by unexpected attention. Bernard, looking at Ralph, noted that everyone seems to have heard about their adventures and achievements. Here, the adventure rake was getting louder, and the excerpts of conversations reported that Ralph had overcome a demon that even the famous Golden Lions could not overcome. This demon turned out to be too strong even for them. One of the adventurers told that they got into the depth of eternal storms, inhabited by dangerous monsters. There are horrible conditions here, are poor nutrition, and the danger is always at every step. Stunned Herd, he seemed to not believe his own ears. It was at this moment that Guildmaster approached them, Mr. Fran. A tall man with wise eyes and a confident gait. He happily expressed pleasure, seeing them unharmed. The conversation began with the fact that someone noted, Figaro and the team went to explore the dungeon, although the official request did not receive it. Fran was genuinely surprised, and even a little dissatisfied that Figaro acts unauthorized, without the permission of the guild. Bernard, understanding nodding, confirmed that Figaro really often ignores formalities, preferring to act at his own discretion. Art pulled a folder from the bag and handed it to a friend. He, with obvious interest and respect, invited him to his office to discuss all the issues in more detail. The old office was a cozy room, equipped with old oak shelves filled with books and artifacts from the depths of ages. Cards and drawings with mythical creatures and legendary places were hung on the walls. Bernard, Ralph, and Elsa sat down for a massive wooden table, and Bernard began the story. He explained that it was not yet possible to accurately determine the name of the place they investigated, but suggested that the remains of a goddess who was like in the ancient cellar could rest there. Bernard continued his story, noting that the entrance to the dungeon was located near Van Lake. He described how some of the rooms inside the dungeon is moved in water, which complicates the study. Bernard stressed that they found this hiding place only thanks to Ralph and Elga, who opened another less obvious entrance. Once Franz Heiss drew attention to the picture in the report. The image was a monster with a lion's head, a goat muzzle, a snake tail, and wings. Franz asked Bernard to delay a moment, and pointing to the picture, asked what it was for the creation. Sighing, Bernard explained that this monster had a protective magical barrier, capable of repelling any attack. Bernard's story was gaining increasing tension. He described how they fought with the beast, feeling the futility of every effort. But then, he looked at Ralph with pride and gratitude. Bernard emphasized that it was thanks to the courage and determination of Ralph that the monster managed to overcome, despite all the obstacles. He also added that because of the large number of extraordinary abilities, the creature can be called Chimera, as is accepted in the people, and this name is likely to be entrenched. Bren, returning to Ralph with a solemn expression, noted that since he opened this creature, his name should be perpetuated in the book. Ralph, standing in front of the head of the guild, was amazed and somewhat embarrassed by the fact that his name would be Encyclopedia of Monsters. It was an incredible and exciting experience for him. Seeing Ralph's reaction, Guard added that having learned about a new monster, many brave adventurers will inevitably want to meet him personally. He emphasized the importance of spreading this information among all guilds to prepare adventurers for possible meetings with chimeras. Nadude put forward the idea that including Ralph's name in the encyclopedia, they may be able to attract the attention of his parents. He said that vading rings had previously belonged to the grandmother who gave them to the newlyweds when his father married his mother. Listening to Bernard, he realized that he was right. His parents, known for their love of adventure, often worked in different guilds. This thought filled him with hope that one day he would still be able to meet them again. His heart was filled with warmth and determination, and the look became more focused. He realized that many more adventures were waiting ahead. But the search for parents has gained even more weight for him. Leaving guild, Ralph and Bernard thanked Franu for his support and assistance. Suddenly, Fran stopped them on the doorstep, asking Bernard to stay for a while because he had another important task for them. However, before he had managed to explain, a man with a confident and harsh posture turned to them. With a serious and decisive expression of the face, a demon, dressed in simple clothes, approached Ralph and Bernard. His view combined respect with perseverance. With a slight cover, he invited them to follow him, explaining that Mr. Fersen was inviting them. Bernard and Ralph exchanged views, nodded, and moved by the dynamic long corridor of guild. After some time, they entered the simple and at the same time an elegant office of Mr. Force. The room was harmonious, massive bookshelves with ancient folios, trophy on the walls that told about feats, and a large dark table, behind which Mr. Force high. He regretted the inconvenience caused, explaining that his meaningless son had a lot of trouble for them. His words sounded sincerely, and Bernard, along with Ralph, stunned, did not know what to answer. Suddenly, the door in the office with a roar dissolved, and a figure flew into the room. His face was covered with rage and insult. He approached his father and stated with indignation that they were fighting with Chimera and Ralph. In his voice there was a boldness mixed with pride and self-confidence. Ralph added that Gatto and Arya became unnecessary for him, and hinted that he would find more worthy participants next time. Zen, while maintaining external peace, but with burning eyes, stood from the table. His voice was quiet, but he felt incredi. The next moment, Mr. Frazen, not raising his voice, but with a clear determination, stated that he was renounced from his son. It was like a thunder. The figure could not believe his hearing. His face faded. He stood as if he were amazed at lightning. He sought support, but met only cold determination in his father's gaze. Mr. Friesen, standing opposite his son, watched his thoughtfully. On his face reflected fatigue and disappointment. He began to say that he could close his eyes on many things, even some of his pranks, but now the situation came out of control. Mr. Fersen stated that Figaro was no longer able to manage his family, and now only destroys the inheritance of the Fersen family. Hearing these words, Zero wanted to deny, but his father's gesture forced him to stop. After that, Zen slowly approached Ralph. His eyes emitted sincere repentance. He once again apologized for all the problems that his son caused Ralph. Feeling sincerity in Forzen's words, he quietly replied that there was no need to apologize, because it was thanks to Figaro that he became who he was today. These words forced Figaro to silence and listen carefully. Looking directly into the eyes of Mr. Forzenzanza, he firmly stated that it was because he was not accepted to the Golden Lions and was expelled from the guild. He met Elsa, and then Mr. Bernard. He explained that all the events in his life have led to important acquaintances and events, and for that he is grateful to Figaro. These sincere words of gratitude were a surprise to the audience. The hero, hearing these words, was deeply impressed. His face reflected a kaleidoscope of emotions, from rage and bitterness to back and regret. With his strength to withstand it, he, without saying a word, ran out of the studio, raced the corridors of the mansion and disappeared from view. After his escape, a loud silence reigned. Xen slowly approached the window and, sighing hard, announced that Figaro was his heir. His voice trembled with a hidden sadness when he looked away. He confessed that he now understands. His son is not ready to inherit the title because it is too young and immature. In these words, all the severity of his father's disappointment and the pain of lost hopes were heard. Hard and Ralph, silently standing nearby, did not know how to support the old one. they at least a little facilitated the difficult moments of Friesen. Returning to them, he noted that he may be able to replace Figaro. His voice sounded decisively and confidently that he was already making new plans for the future. Rosen went to the table and took out a bag of money, which he put before Bernard and Ralph. His face became serious again when he solemnly announced that it was a reward for his son's rescue. Taking a heavy bag in his hands, Enard smiled slightly and asked if Mr. Friesen seemed to be excessive. Friesen, smiling gently, explained that money in the bag is a reward not only for salvation, but also for all inconvenience caused. He emphasized the desire to maintain friendly relations with adventurers and merchants, so he considers such a gift quite fair. Rosen, feeling the views of Bernard and Ralph, continued his explanations with determination and sincere seriousness. He said that in the bag not only money to save the son, but also compensation for all the inconveniences that Ralph had to endure. His voice was equal, but he felt a real concern for justice. Rosen noted that due to the unjustified accusations of Ralph had to pay the debt of the guild, which was now fully cancelled. He reported that he returned all the money that Ralph spent on the payment of debt, thereby restoring justice. In addition, Friesen announced that Ralph's house, which was confiscated, was now returned to him. This news brought waves of relief and joy to all present. Pointing to a bag of money, Friesen added with a slight smile that there is also a small reward for Ralph's effort. These words were treated with respect and gratitude, emphasizing Ralph's contribution to the victory over the monster and his role in salvation. He, realizing all the volume of good deeds, stopped for a moment in a mild surprise. He looked at the bag with money, and in silence, comprehending the hugeness of what was done for him. His eyes were grateful, but the words were stuck in his throat. Finally, he legally thanked Mr. Friesen, and his voice trembled from emotions. This simple word contained all its recognition and gratitude. Elsa had fun to Ralph's house, which became his property again. As he went into his old dwelling, Ralph realized that the house was deserted and needed considerable repair. Despite this, he has a warm sense of nostalgia in his soul. Reese went outside and asked him to warn if someone was approaching. The loyal wolf Zuchich barks loudly in response, ready to protect the house. Going to his room, Ralph felt ambiguous emotions, joy from returning and easy shame. Elsa followed him, looking around. Ralph, noticing her interest, confessed that he was slightly embarrassed because of the present appearance of his home. He began to scratch in the table, looking hard. Elsa did not resist and asked what he was looking for, but Ralph did not stop his search. His hand uncertainly felt a small box, from where he pulled out a chain with 2 rings. Elsa looked at him in surprise. Her eyes were full of questions. In order not to lose these family relics during numerous trips, parents left them at home for reliable storage. He continued with tenderness and respect in his voice. He said that in the last days of his life, his grandmother gave him these rings, commanding them to be presented to the one whom he sincerely loves with all his heart. Once in front of Elsa, Raoul felt his heart began to fight more often. He asked if she would accept the ring, and her eyes, full of surprise and excitement, met him. Trembling with emotions, Elsa asked if he was sure of her decision. Ralph stood in front of Elsa, feeling the heartbeat. Words, as if fearing, were stuck in the throat as the tension increased. Finally gathering all his forces, he suddenly said that Elsa is not just a friend, but a special person for him. Stunned by his confession, she gratefully accepted the ring. Her eyes shone with excitement. When she looked at her, she realized that it was more than just a decoration. It was a symbol with a deep story. Ralph, seeing her reaction, smiled gently, feeling relief. However, in her eyes, a shadow of sadness appeared for a moment, and she quietly asked what to do with this ring. She also reminded she could not wear it on her finger. Rolf, while keeping calm, carefully took the ring and pressed on the chain, and then delicately put it on Elsa's neck. She looked at him in surprise, and Ralph, smiling gently, explained that the ring would be safe and would not break. Amazed by his care and sincerity, she immediately rushed to him and hugged him firmly. Their views met, full of emotions and tenderness, and at that moment it seemed that time stopped. Their faces were gradually approaching, and Ralph felt his heart beat faster with every moment. In the view of Elsa, he noticed a reflection of his own feelings, and this made the moment even more significant. The fabulous moment broke the loud barking of the Reese. Both shuddered, broke away from their thoughts and looked out the window. Bernard and Vanessa stood on the street, who had fun with their hand. Bernard, with a kind smile, asked if they were ready to go and invited them to join them. Ralph and Elsa, having exchanged views and smiles, confidently stated that they were already moving. This moment, despite the unexpected interruption, left a warm feeling of closeness in their hearts. Already near the carriage, Vanessa asked Ralph with a tricky smile whether he found what he was looking for. Ralph nodded, pointing to the ring on his fingers and a chain with a ring on the neck of Elsa. Bernard greeted them, happily stated that he would not mind wearing such a ring. With a smile, he advised to simply buy it, which caused a common laughter. Then, having gained seriousness, he announced a new task. His decisive voice immediately attracted the attention of all those present. He reported that their task was to deliver extremely valuable materials to the famous blacksmith in the mini. These materials were crucial for the success of an important project. Vanessa, having carefully evaluating the situation, immediately undersold. The carriage wheels screamed, and the horses slowly moved forward. Ralph looked around again, saying goodbye to his native Ogdorven, his birth and childhood. It was engulfed by mixed feelings, a slight sadness from goodbye to the home, and at the same time excitement and joy for new adventures. The new future is already unfolding in front of him, full of connections with people with whom he has passed many trials. Each of them became not just a combat companion, but a true friend. He declared with great appearance and unwavering confidence that in the sixth world, the forces of destruction and revival have united. She was not just a messenger, but the goddess Sasakuran, who stated that the legendary creature, shrouded in myths and fears, woke up. All this happened on the Holy Land, where every stone and a tree carried ancient power. In the center of a large hall, surrounded by a glow and grandeur, a lady sat on the throne. Her figure embodied strength and wisdom. She sought to revive the monster, finish it, and finally destroy it. On both sides of the throne room were other deities. The goddess Ecptis, symbolizing the third world, and the goddess Axleon, who embodied the second. They listened carefully. In their views read a cocktail of interest and anxiety. Exchanging the views, they asked without hesitation whether the powerful religious was ruled here. The goddess Sasakuran, smiling lightly, reported that such power is not for simple mortals, hinting at the indifference of the goddess of the sixth world. Baragal nodded. Her eyes flashed from understanding and illumination. She remembered how the seal, imposed by the lady of Sasakurayan on the beast, was destroyed by a blade, left by the courtyard in that world. Words overflowing with reproach and anxiety made everyone think about what was happening in the world. The goddess Saskaran, with a light note of sarcasm in her voice, noted that the goddess of the sixth world seems to be not interested in his power and responsibilities. With fire in her eyes and anger in the voice, Bargal reproached the goddess of the sixth world for her absence and inaction. She asked in surprise whether the goddess had to be called here, although it was obvious that she did not want to see her. At this point, a clear figure with a decisive look appeared in the hall. She, smiling a little, noted that the die did not lack the courage and boldness. It was the goddess of Trucy, the owner of the sixth world. Sasakurin, not hiding her smile, noted that she had already caused a bundle, and she appeared at her request. Trucy confidently approached them, radiating strength and power. The goddess Ecptis, with an insightful, icy glance, ordered her to explain everything to the collected crowd. As if immersed in memories, the Trucy began to tell her story. She remembered the days when she was the goddess of the sixth world, and the legendary beast who drove her into the trap and destroyed her soul. Others said that she returned to the ground to fight the monster again, but the beast rejected her army back. At that moment, she was seriously injured and barely kept on her feet. She explained that despite his serious condition, she could destroy the soul of the beast. However, the goddess only decided to seal him, giving him a chance to revive. Summer rose to the hall. The goddess exclaimed that Darius was on the verge of death, which is why she had to act like that. Suddenly, with a fury in her voice, she exclaimed that he could not die from such small scratches. Her determination was obvious, and the crowd froze in silence when she screamed, expressing all the power of her will. Iris continued her speech, noting that the seal imposed on the beast was not completed. Soon the legendary beast can be revived. She declared her intention to control the strength of destruction and revival so that he finally destroy the seal. The room reigned silence when her words were struck by all present. Their faces reflected a mixture of surprise and anxiety. In a decisive voice, Blius announced that when the monster returns, she would go down to the ground again and end it forever. With an insightful look and voice, filled with determination, she stated that the courtyard is only the deity of this world and has no right to decide his fate. She stressed that the Dvois would not be able to fully use its divine forces on Earth, reminding of the need not to repeat the mistake. Her words sounded as a warning and a challenge at the same time, passing concern for maintaining the balance and order in the world. Iris, squeezing his fists and throwing a formidable look at her fellow god-daters, said the verse that everything could be different if it was not for the intervention of the woman she called a child with an unusual name. Her eyes were burning with anger and determination, reminding everyone of past defeats and desire to correct them. Curran, with a slight smile on her mouth, noted that Twiris once was defeated by the legendary beast, and even she is not able to predict what would happen this time. Her words were heard like a challenge and a reminder of the past, filling the atmosphere of the hall with tension. Openly demonstrating the determination, she stated that if she could finally get rid of this monster, she promises to return to her duties and treat them with proper seriousness. Aquarine, with a look of full confidence, asked if she was confident in her strength and readiness. Darius, without thinking, replied that of course, she could do it. Dasakarain, weighing every word, agreed with the proposal, but provided that in the event of defeat, Twius, its world will be irreversibly destroyed. Her words were caused by shock and confusion among other goddesses. At this point, the goddess Axlian approached Ryan's garden. She gently but persistently reminded her that the removal of one of the worlds could disturb the balance in all other universe. Her words were like a plea to weigh every step and act with caution. Azakarine, while maintaining cold-bloodedness, stated that it was better to destroy the world than to pass it on to the beast. However, the Axel did not give up and asked Azakarine to listen to other goddesses before making such a decision. Having hit the axe with the floor with such force that the sound thickened all over the hall, she confidently stated that she would not be defeated. Full of determination and anger, she ordered the goddesses to follow her sitting in their places. In response, the goddess was outraged, demanding that she control her words and show more respect. The shark eventually agreed. She ordered Darius to immediately report all the strange phenomena and changes as soon as they appeared. Iris, expressing understanding, began to retreat back, walking with confidence and determination. Kurain, watching from the chair behind the distance, Darius smiled. In her head roar, questions and anticipation raged. This time, the Bernard group moved with a trolley tortuous ways surrounded by thick forests and flowering meadows. The horses, feeling the proximity of the city, accelerated the step, and the aroma of fresh leaves and flowers filled the air. Suddenly, Bernard, sitting forward, turned to his comrades and announced with a smile that they had already arrived. They spread the green oasis of Cambion, where magic and nature are amazingly combined. Each street and building were riddled with magic. In the center of the huge tree stood, its branches reached the sky, like giant hands that hugged clouds. Enchanted by a spectacle, he asked what a tree was. Bernard, with a touch of pride and respect in his voice, explained that this tree of spirits was sacred and ancient, which is the heart of Cambion. Embraced, Elsa asked what the uniqueness of this tree was. Bernard, sighing and feeling a mentor, explained that the tree was imbued with magical energy that fills it from the roots to the top. Not the entire edge of Cambion was imbued with magic, but this made it possible to create a unique ecosystem here. The city was like a living organism, where nature and magic coexisted in perfect harmony. Nessa said with professional interest that the branches and leaves of this tree can serve as magical materials. He admired that each leaf costs 10,000 goddesses and a twig, up to 100,000. But if you can get the root, its cost can reach up to 1,000,000. To hear such numbers impressed him. He realized how invaluable the city and its resources are. The carriage was constantly moving along the streets, passing the homes of rainbow colors and shops filled with rare goods and artifacts. Everyone in the carriage thoughtfully bored, thinking how many more unknown secrets and riddles are hiding this world. He hopefully mentioned the moment when he joined Mr. Bernard's group, realizing that it was one of the best decisions in his life. Traveling with Bernard and others revealed the unknown worlds, which he never dreamed of. These incredible places inspired him and awakened the thirst for knowledge and adventure. When the carriage stopped and they went outside, Bernard, with a businessy look and confident intonation, said Rolf received an important task. He had to buy as many ancient things and weapons as possible. Rolf, ready for any task, took it seriously, realizing that it was not just a purchase, but part of a large plan that should strengthen their group and prepare for future trials. Sparks shone in the eyes, and a light smile played on her lips when she said that they should continue tense workout. Her tone was half jokingly, but a firm determination broke through it. Aware of the seriousness of the girlfriend's words, she nodded with responsibility. Her view testified to his readiness for future trials and the desire to become stronger. Rolf, remembering past workouts, smiled, and with a slight mockery, noted that in the skill of Vanessa turns into a real demon. With his father's warmth, he watched the team in his gaze and, noting that all purchases and cases behind, suggested relaxing and enjoying the beauty of the city. His voice sounded calm and confident because he trusted his ward and believed that they deserved a vacation. He suggested exploring the city, immersing his atmosphere, and learning more about his history and culture. Ralph and Elsa exchanged joyful views and agreed with the proposal. When they approached the store, Raoul felt as if it all began again. However, he was now ready for new discoveries. Elsa, noticing Raoul's thoughtfulness, suggested that he seek profitable purchases together, and he nodded to her initiative. He asked if the old things were needed again, which Ralph confirmed that the more they would find, the better. He noted that the city is big, so there should be many things. They decided to start from the main street, where the most shops are concentrated. They walked the street, enjoying the scenery and sounds of the city, when suddenly their smell captivated a seductive aroma. The faithful companion, Bart Lobby, immediately expressed his approval. She also remembered that she had recently seen a shop where they sold meat smoked on a watery tree, and suggested trying it. Rolf, unable to resist such a temptation, gladly agreed. Walking through the street, Raoul enjoyed the atmosphere and conversation. Suddenly, he came to the realization that they remained two, and he was thought to be like a date. It was a little worried, but he tried not to express his feelings. Suddenly, their attention was attracted by the crowd and noise nearby. Suddenly, the man rapidly raced Ralph, and he instinctively bounced back, feeling the heart crashing faster. He managed to see only the ears that looked out of the hood, leaving no doubt it could only be a native. The influx of adrenaline has temporarily muted all thoughts, but the rapid awareness returned him to reality. The children surrounding the girl in the hood began to look restlessly and discuss loudly what was happening. One of them announced that the girl was lost in the crowd, and they immediately found it. Looking back, they were looking for a way out. Hearing this, Ralph lifted his eyebrow with surprise and asked Elsa what had happened. Elsa looked at and realized that the soldiers are constantly looking for the same man-girl who they had just seen. They sat down for a small wooden table where they appeared in front of them with appetizing meat that emitted a seductive aroma. Starting to eat, Ralph and his companion were amazed. The meat melted in his mouth, and the smoky smell gave him special spiciness. Each piece was reminiscent of the amazing power of the trees with its ancient roots and stories, wrapped enchantments and legends. They enjoyed every moment, forgetting for a while about all the worries. However, a peaceful vacation was clouded by whisper at a nearby table. People discussed the appearance of a monster in the forest lively. Their voices were becoming more loud, and Ralph could not notice it. They said it was the 15th creature this year, which only enhanced the alarm in their voices. The 12th, when he heard it, leaned to Elsa and reminded her that Vanessa once mentioned the task of destroying monsters. He realized that it was an opportunity to prove himself. Full of determination, he addressed the people who discussed the monster and asked them to tell them in more detail. Initially alert, EPL quickly changed their mind when Elsa explained that they adore adventures. He began a story about how about 5 years ago, the city was controlled by a powerful family of players. They settled near the spirit tree and banned access to its resources, trying to assign themselves a magical power that radiates a tree. The man added that now no one collects the leaves and branches of this tree. The residents of the town assure that because of this anxiety, the monster began to attack the city from the forest regularly. Every year, the attacks became more frequent and destroyed everything in their path, leaving people in constant fear. The Adventurers Guild often received a request to collect the branches and leaves of the oven to counteract the monsters. The interlocutor explained that it was just rumors. The Pluther's family secretly organizes attacks on the city, covering up with monsters' attacks. They say they steal people and send them to a mysterious camp. Interested, they asked about the camp again. But at that moment, a man with a black beard came to them and strongly urged everyone to stop the discussion. The man with a beard explained that their conversation can be heard, and if that happens, they will be in the camp in a moment. He put several glasses on the table and looked around, noticing how the boys approached them. Looking at the guards, he realized that he had already seen this coat of arms before. The man explained that all problems come from a faulty wiring. Then he suggested that you stop the conversation and drink better to get away from unpleasant thoughts. Watching the situation, Elsa noted that there were enough problems in the city, which Ralph had fully agreed. Twilight has already descended on the city when Ralph finished loading the latest boxes into the cart. He exhaled lightly, feeling that he finally finished this boring work. Suddenly, Elsa happily exclaimed that Vanessa and Bernard had returned. Ralph, slightly tired but satisfied, nodded and closed the warehouse, checking that everything was securely closed. Soon, in their cozy temporary shelter, the table was already covered, and the pleasant aroma of food filled the room, creating a home atmosphere. 12. Looking forward to the news, asked Bernard what they saw and/or whether they learned something interesting. Bernard, swearing gloomily, confessed that though they did not find anything, but came across many unpleasant rumors. Arranging the dishes on the table, she hinted that it was time to postpone conversations and focus on dinner. She reported that she prepared something special and called on everyone to enjoy the taste of her dishes. The food quickly took over the attention of everyone, and they started a meal. Suddenly, he tensed, his ears were alert, as if he had caught almost an unspecified sound. He asked everyone to subside, because he had the feeling that someone was outside the room. The group was alert, and tension began to grow in the air. Nared and Rolf, alertly holding weapons, came out and began to look closely at the surrounding area. Their eyes explored the shadows in every corner. However, despite their prudence, no one managed to detect anyone. In art, as if a little relaxed and distant, they thought that all this could only be imagination. But suddenly, the excited voice of Elsa came from the house, which urgently urged them to return. Returning in a hurry, their hearts were crazy about anxiety. At the house, they saw Elsa, which trembled with excitement, and pointed to the door of the warehouse, claiming that someone could penetrate. The Rail frowned. I am sure that he closed the warehouse. But his self-confidence was shaken, seeing the serious and excited appearance of Elsa. Opening the warehouse door with caution, they slowly started checking. In the dim light of the oil lamp, they opened a sight. Between the boxes, their faithful wolf of Rosius fussed. Not only stopping near one of the boxes, he began to bark loudly, and his barking sounded all over the warehouse, filling the room with alarming sounds. Bernard and Ralph looked at each other hard, sharing cautious views. Squeezing the sword's handle, he carefully approached the box, in which Rice clearly found something. Before him was a picture that he did not expect to see. In the box, curled up with a cake on a pile of soft cloths, a little bee scarab slept peacefully. Her ears were barely flipping, and her breathing remained even and quiet. The girl slept sweetly on the bed. Her breathing remained even and calm. Elsa approached the baby and sat on the edge of the bed, watching how sweet and careless and sleeping. Meanwhile, Ralph, who stood, thought interested who the girl was and how she was in their warehouse. He was fleeing. He wondered how she could enter. Bernard, sitting by the window, suggested that the girl apparently made his way through the window, that the baby could climb through him. At that moment, Rissy, given to the wolf, ran to the girl and gently licked her cheek with a warm tongue. Waking up, she felt the warm before, and seeing the dog, a joyful smile appeared on her face. However, the joy quickly changed anxiety when she noticed people around her. She instinctively quenched on them, showing small fangs with fear. Ralph, trying not to scare her, told others. Looking at her face, he noted that one of her hands was covered with dried blood. With caution, she reached out and took her little girl's small palm in her finger, trying not to scare her. Seeing this scene, Vanessa came closer and gently but decisively asked the girl to allow her to look at the wound. The uncertain girl reluctantly reached out. Vanessa carefully turned her palm and saw a deep wound that, although not healed, could be inflamed without treatment. She closed her eyes and focused. Her rod shone with soft light, starting with healing. The light wrapped the wound, slowly tightening it. Vanessa watched with a smile as the girl's skin became smooth and healthy again. Having stroked her face, she wondered if she got better. The girl who watched closely at this time looked at her hand in surprise. Noticing that the wounds were gone, she smiled widely, and in her eyes she shined with gratitude. The mentor leaned the girl and noted that although the wounds were healed, she should still take a bath to finally clean. The girl asked if she would hurt. The mentor shook his head gently, assuring that everything would go well. Subsequently, Ralph approached Bernard, who stood his back and asked if he found everything he was looking for. Bernard replied, explaining that he found baby things in stock. Noting Bernard looks worried, he asked what was the matter. Bernard confessed that he did not leave a bad anticipation. With anxiety in the voice, NASA exclaimed from the bathroom, calling Bernard to come immediately. He sighed annoyed, but still headed for the bathroom to find out what happened this time. After the shower, although he felt a little better, he could not get rid of the feeling that all this was no accident. He returned and saw Vanessa already skillfully weave a braid from the long, wet hair of the girl, and Rice was comfortable with her knees. Vanessa said with a smile that Rice seems to have found a new girlfriend. Ralph, watching this scene, suddenly remembered where he saw this girl before. Ralph suddenly shuddered, realizing that it was the same girl they saw in the afternoon in the city. Stunned by such a discovery, Ralph remembered how the girl was chased by the guards. Bernard, hearing it, was stunned and looked at her with even greater interest. She lowered her head, realizing that she had to explain something now. Bernard persistently questioned why she became the object of such persecution. The rumor of the voice tone, he reassured her, assuring that if she was sincere, they would certainly find a way to help. At this point, her belly began to grumble loudly, and everyone around was surprised. Subsequently, the girl finally enjoyed dinner. She ate with such admiration, as if she had not tasted food for a long time and tried to be an obedient girl. Usually, after quenching hunger, her eyes began to close from fatigue. The girl, exhausted, fell asleep at the table. Ralph carefully and gently took her in his arms and moved to a room where a place to rest was prepared for her. Bernard, watching, suggested waiting for the girl to wake up to ask her about what was happening and decide how to proceed. When the evening silence came and everyone was sleeping, Elsa lay in bed, and the girls cried to her. Elsa looked at Rala and suggested that he lie down. In response, Ralph just smiled, comfortably stirring on the floor. He spread the blanket and invited the cutter to him, joining that they also had a blanket. Slowly approaching the lamp, carefully bypassing the things scattered around the room, quietly told LA that he would turn off the light. But at that moment he noticed that her attention had attracted something else. She looked there and saw the faithful wolf Rice slowly approach the sleeping girl and lay side by side. On her cheeks, little drops of tears were shimmering, slowly flowing down, as if reflecting all her grief and anxiety. Watching this, she leaned quietly to the girl and carefully wiped her tears so as not to wake her up. For a moment, the idea of how much pain and fear had this little soul to endure, even in a dream to cry. She gently held her hand on the baby's head, seeking to give all her care and warmth. The view of this moving moment made Ralph suddenly immerse himself in his memories. He mentioned how difficult it was after the disappearance of parents. The dream became unattainable. Every closing of the eyelids brought paintings of pits, dangers that could encounter loved ones. But the wise and good grandmother was always nearby, sitting near his bed until he fell asleep. Looking at the sleeping girl, he felt these memories intertwined with reality. He came quietly, as if he was afraid to break her calm. Gently stroked her on her head, as the grandmother once did, whispering that she is not alone now. They will protect her together. But the girl quietly continued to breathe in her sleep. The Rezer lay on the bed suggested that Ralph join again. Although Ralph also noted that 3 on the bed would be tight, Elsa with a smile reassured. Everything is fine. The desk would move for everyone to have enough space. The Rezer, as if understanding what was said, gladly barks, confirming Elsa's confidence. Waking up from a quiet but intrusive sound, he barely opened his eyes and saw a girl playing from the recel. The wolf cheerfully waved his tail, and she smiled, praising him. What a good one. Finally waking up, he told her that the wolf was called Rice. He introduced himself to the stealth, which just woke up. The girl, still a little alert, asked in Rice whether you could trust these people. The wolf has fun barking, as if confirming that they really deserve trust. The girl calmed down and finally said that in this case he would also tell her her name. She introduced herself as Gunya. Elsa and Ralph exchanged views full of relief and joy. Then Elsa, smiling gently, suggested that Gunya go for breakfast, but first wash and dress. Subsequently, everyone gathered at the table, enjoying breakfast. Ralph, meanwhile, thoughtfully studied his plate. After the breakfast, everyone went outside. Ralph introduced Bernard and Vanessa to the Nagoon. The girls smiled welcome and quietly promised to remember their names. Bernard, watching her carefully, wondered what had happened to her. A shadow appeared on the girl's face. She dropped down and her eyes were filled with pain. Noticing this, everyone froze in anticipation of her words. Having gained full breaths of air, the Ujuna confessed that she did not want to remember what happened to her. The views of all present were chained to her, feeling the burden of her memories. Gunya noted that she felt the presence of good people in front of her, so she was sure that they could help her. Gathering with thoughts, the girl sharply turned to Ralph, asking to bring paper and pen. Although her sharpness surprised him a little, Ralph quickly fulfilled his request and in a few minutes returned with the necessary things. She began to draw on the paper she brought, and something like a map appeared from her pen. Bernard, looking at the picture, involuntarily imagined the divine language, but soon realized that it was rather a local dialect. 12th. Paying attention to the unusual characters, you asked Bernard if it was a divine language. But his answer was surprised. She was different. Zujunya quickly and confidently drew, seeking to reproduce every detail. She confessed that she was found under a tree. She looked at a huge tree that stood in the city center. Ralph, hearing it, was amazed and interested, because it was a tree of spirits. He asked what they were doing here under a tree, and Nagunya began her sad story. She explained that they were forced to work in the mine under this tree. Gunya began her story filled with trembling memories. She described life in constant fear and under threat of severe attacks. Ruthless villains were beating daily, not only causing physical harm, but also destroying their will, turning their lives in. He continued the story, remembering how they were kept in a cage, as if animals. Iron rods did not allow freedom to dream. Sometimes people in black cloaks came to silence at night and took someone. No one knew what happened to the unhappy, but none returned. The fear of the unknown hung over them with a heavy cloud. One day, the other captives decided to help her. They realized that someone should call for help, otherwise they were threatened with death. Under the cover of the night, when the guards lost their vigilance, they released Nail from the cage. The night was full of fear and despair, but she managed to escape. The girl ran through the forest, not knowing what she was waiting in front, but believed that she had a better life at her freedom. Her freedom was short. Bad people tracked her trace and began persecution. She ran, exhausted and frightened, but knew she could not stop. Her heart was beating as never before when she was hiding. But even in this horror, she did not seem looking for a way to escape. Everyone listened to her story with a tumbled breath, delving into the depths of her suffering. Ralph attentively perceived every word, and before his eyes gradually a picture of horror, which hid behind the walls under a spiritual tree. He realized that all the rumors they heard before were true.